Okay, good afternoon. We are now back in session and we'll begin the afternoon session with the Healthy Responsible Students Committee led by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Reginald Keenan along with my friend Alan Duncan. Mr. Chair, we have one discussion item, and today we'll address the amendment to the State Board Policy Whole Child NC, and we'll be asking Dr. Essick to come forward and tell us about the amendments to the policy.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Keenan. Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, members of the board. It's good to be with you. Glad I didn't have to be right before lunch and talk really fast. So glad to be bumped. I'm here today to present some updates to the Interagency Advisory Committee policy that will better reflect where this work is going moving forward. You have a copy of the policy in your materials. I'm just going to give some highlights of that to begin with. So just a recap for those of you who were not part of this board when this all began back in 2015, the interagency, can you slide that down just a little bit? Thank you. The policy and this work was established back in 2015. This was an advisory committee to the State Board of Education with its charge to identify and review challenges of at-risk school-aged children, things like poverty, safety, health, and the non-academic barriers related to student success. This group's charge was to make recommendations to the State Board of Ed and to other agencies and stakeholders about this work moving forward. It was also part of our response to the Leandro work. The West Ed report suggested we should be addressing more of the non-academic barriers of student success, and this is part of that response and part of that work. In 2016, right after the passage of this policy, the board adopted this resolution naming the Whole School, Whole Community, Whole Child framework as a framework for the state board and also for our districts to use, and many of them do. All of them use the Whole School, Whole Community, Whole Child framework for their School Health Advisory Council work. So just a history of where we've been with the committee. The committee met quarterly since 2017, created a mission and vision statement, and had just prioritized 3 areas of work: a leadership, engagement, buy-in, and support, a welcoming family engagement culture, and a coordination of preventative services. So we took that and we brought that forward to the state board. And we received feedback from many of you on those recommendations and moved forward to try to put some of that work into place and then be able to bring that back to you. And then March 2020 hit and everything stopped. Most of the people on our Interagency Advisory Committee led their COVID efforts for their respective organizations, and so many of them had to leave and go take care of that work. So we were put on hold for a while. So what I'm bringing forward to you today are some changes to the policy that we can hopefully make that will help this work be stronger and move this work forward. We're revising the policy to now say Whole Child NC. That was the name that was adopted for this group. So instead of Interagency Advisory Committee, it's Whole Child NC. We've modified the membership representation. A lot of that is because we had a lot of duplication in the membership of who was part of this committee and who did this work. Also, there was some reorganization at DHHS, and this better reflects some of what their new groups are and areas are. And then we removed some folks who were more advisors from DPI so that we had some of the leadership roles from the community there. We also altered the commitments and put those in 2- and 3-year commitments so that we can stagger those out among the people on the committee. And we also added that the Healthy School section would provide leadership and facilitation for the work moving forward. So one of the things that we had also asked you all for quite some time is said we need some funding to support this work and to support a position to support this work. And so we have been able to leverage some of the federal funds that we have to create a new position. It's a school health partnerships and policy consultant. That consultant will be Suzanne Schmall. She's here in the room with me today. Suzanne's been working with us for quite some time, and she has a long history in public health and has, since she's been here at DPI, has really learned how to combine that public health, school health work to really benefit our public schools. And so she'll be taking over in that role and will also be leading this work moving forward. And again, the purpose of this is to, you know, our school districts have been working in a crisis mode for a long time, and when they look at the whole school, whole community, whole child framework, a lot of them have been looking at individual areas where there's a crisis, and they try to put out that fire. And we're looking forward to moving our work back so that people look at it in the context of the entire community, not just at the issue of the day, and think about the long-term outcomes for our student health, because we always say that healthy children learn better, and as Suzanne said to me this morning, they live better too. So that's the update to the policy. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Any questions from the members or from the floor? Any comments? If there are none, Mr. Chair, that's the report.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. I'll now turn to Mr. Wendell Hall, Chair of the Government Community Affairs Committee. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do serve as the Chair of the Government Relations Committee, along with Geo Clements, who also serve as the Vice Chair of the committee. Today we'll be talking about those things that are occurring out in the unit, out in the districts across the state that need to be noted. We'll also be dealing with our short-term requests concerning funding from the General Assembly. Ms. Pittman is with us at this point in time, and she will share with us some updates on the community relations.
I think we're going to wait for the PowerPoint. You're in December.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
While we're waiting on that, Mr. Hall,
Yes.
I failed to mention before I handed this off to you that we have been given a bit of a reprieve from the Office of State Budget Management concerning our short session legislative priorities, and have been given another month to work on that. So we'll change the second item on your committee to a discussion item, and it will not be on action tomorrow.
Okay.
So,
That changes things.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and board members and my colleagues. My name is Julie Pittman, and I am the Special Advisor to State Superintendent for Teacher Engagement. I'm excited to be here today to present to you, and also on behalf of my friend and colleague, Dr. Angie Mullinex, who is unable to be with us today, to present some updates on community affairs. So you know, we have three main goals for the Government and Community Affairs Committee, and those mostly revolve around whole child and partnership work. If you go to the next slide, we're really going to look at some partnership work today. So starting with our promising practices, we're bringing back to you today an update on teacher housing initiatives. Freeburg McKinney and I have presented on Buncombe County Schools and Asheville City Schools, Williams Baldwin Teacher Campus, as well as the Duke Teach House with Durham Public Schools. And there's been some additional work that's happening with Bertie County Schools with their teacher housing apartments. What we're excited to know is that as these teacher housing initiatives spread and scale out into different districts, they are offering some recruitment and retention opportunities for our teachers. Specifically, when you look at the scale of what Buncombe County and Asheville City Schools has been able to do with their model, but also the wraparound support services that are happening with the Duke Teach House and Durham Public Schools, Bertie County Schools was able to come back to the table table and want to partner and find out more from the Duke Teach House so that they could be able to put some of those wraparound services into the model that they're doing. I know my colleague Christy Van Auken, who's a special advisor for workforce development, is also working with some other districts in the North Central and Northeast region to try to scale out some more teacher housing initiatives for other teachers in some high needs areas. So we're really excited about the movement that we're seeing happen across the state with this. Next slide, please. An additional update on promising practices for Grow Your Own Teacher pipeline. Dr. Mullinex has highlighted the Edgecombe County Public Schools and Edgecombe Early High School Scholar Teachers Program, as well as the Teacher Cadet Program. We specifically highlighted Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools and East Forsyth High School because of the work that is happening there for Teacher Cadet. But Teacher Cadet is an initiative that is across the state in many different districts, and we're able to see that those districts that are embracing that model are being able to grow their own teacher pipeline, which, as you heard today, is something that is of the highest importance for this board and some of the work that we're doing. I am excited to announce that the North Carolina Teacher Cadet Conference will happen this weekend, where the teacher cadets will be able to come together and gain valuable professional development as they look forward into their new careers as teachers going forward after they graduate from high school. Speaking of celebration, I would like to report on the Beginning Teacher of the Year program that is sponsored by NCAT and Prudential. We were able to name Xavier Adams as the third Beginning Teacher of the Year for North Carolina. He is from Chapel Hill, Orange County Schools, right? Orange County Schools. And he is pictured there along with Leanne Rose, who was our first Beginning Teacher of the Year, and Emily Higdon is our second Beginning Teacher of the Year. This particular program does a lot for honoring beginning teachers, making sure that we're retaining them and giving them valuable professional development, and also encouraging our districts and our charter schools to celebrate those first-year teachers as a method of retention and be able to build relationships between those teachers, those districts, and the support that programs that are offered by NCAT and the department can do for those teachers and others. Earlier last month, we had the very first annual, hopefully, Teacher Leadership Summit, where we had two main focuses. One was on teacher recruitment and retention, and we were able to really talk about a lot of the work that you heard this morning from the Pathways to Excellence and get valuable teacher feedback. I know that the superintendent said that we have a plan for getting additional stakeholder feedback, specifically with teachers in the field. This was the first step to that, and we started it back in March. We were able to talk about the importance of professional development opportunities going forward with the Pathways to Excellence, teacher observations and evaluations, and be able to give valuable feedback to the subcommittees on how that would work, and you were able to see some of the fruits of that labor come forward this morning. There were several compensation questions, as they continue to have compensation questions, but was excited to hear some of those questions answered in this morning's presentation. We also talked about teacher leadership, student growth models, diversity and inclusion, equality in evaluation processes, and career status questions. All of those things are being taken up by the subcommittees. I know I had a conversation during the break with Maureen Stover about the upcoming subcommittee work that's going to happen, and a conversation with Dr. Miller yesterday about how the subcommittees will continue to take up these questions as we move the model forward, and then be able to get continual feedback, hopefully in April, May, and June. Next slide, please. The second part of the summit was on teacher voice and how we can help teachers understand how to use their voice the most effective way that they can. So we looked at, again, supporting beginning teachers. So we were able to have several of our new beginning teachers join us in the summit. Teachers talked about how important it is that teachers have adult supports so that they can get the things that they need so that they can then be able to support their students in their classrooms. We also addressed professional leadership opportunities, academic opportunities, the importance of community engagement and being able to bring communities into the schools. And we've never seen a better opportunity to do that than during and post-COVID. Building better communication between all education and stakeholders as something that is very important going forward. The teacher pipeline support, more support staff, compensation, and really driving the narrative, not necessarily shifting it or adjusting it, but driving it, that this is a profession that supports schools and students and teachers and communities and all need to be in collaboration. I was very thankful to be able to have my colleagues Eugenia Floyd and Maureen Stover, along with some members of Ed&C and the superintendent, Catherine Truitt, come and help support those teachers. We were also able to take them over to the General Assembly where they could begin to practice their voice in front of some of our General Assembly friends. Are there any questions?
I have a quick question about the difference between adult support. I'm sorry, Chair.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Just barrel right in.
I'm used to that.
A question, a difference between adult supports and number 8, more support staff. What is that?
Adult support would be like adult self-care, helping support our teachers so that they're not just going into the classroom. You know, we talk a lot specifically in this committee about whole child, whole school, whole community, and how we're able to offer those support services for our students. But oftentimes our teachers and a lot of our staff do not necessarily get those same opportunities for support. And so that was really what the conversation was about.
Well-being.
Well, yes, adult well-being, and then support staff would be additional bodies to help, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just have a statement to make. I think that it's really important that everyone knows that the beginning teacher of the year cohort is 27 young teachers strong.
Yes.
So this is a larger cohort than our Teacher of the Year cohort. And those 27 teachers, thanks to Julie Pittman and Freebird and NCAT, are now very well positioned to go into their communities, into their districts, and provide support to other beginning teachers. And as that model continues to develop, I have no doubt that it has this board's support. And I just can't thank you enough for what you've done with that program, Julie. And would love to have Xavier come sometime and meet the board and allow us to engage with him.
We already have a plan for that.
One step
Always
ahead,
one
Chair.
step ahead. I actually have a meeting with the 3 beginning teachers of the year next week that we're ironing out the details for, to be able to have all 3 of them come and meet the board and talk about what they're doing, because now it's not just 27 strong, it's 27 strong every year. We're in our 3rd year. So a little bit of attrition and moving around outside the classroom, but still in education and some other areas. I think we're right around 74-ish strong for 3 years, which is really incredible. So that model is 3 beginning teachers from each of the 8 educational regions and 3 beginning teachers from our charters every year. And they come to NCAT for a week and get professional development and then do a round of interviews that is rigorous, but they are so supportive and so loving and so cheering of each other. I know Ms. Floyd could definitely speak to that and to the power that those teachers have. I spoke with Ms. Kamnitz while I was at NCAT and said, honestly, if we could bring those 27 young early career teachers, because some are in their 2nd career as teachers, as beginning teachers, if we could bring them here and people across the court here or in this room or in this building could ask them the hard questions that are plaguing what we're doing and what we're seeing in education, I feel very certain that you would find answers to all, if not almost all, of those questions.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say one thing really quick, and I love everything that Julie just said because it was a dynamic experience to be among these great educators. I also just want to mention that these 3 and these 74 are our educators that stuck it out during the pandemic. They student taught in a pandemic, they began their career in a pandemic, and that within itself is something to really, really show and tell you and that who they are as people, and what they and how much drive they have to serve the children in North Carolina Public Schools. So I just wanted to lift that up as a reminder of where they started. They started in the middle of it all. So thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. Anyone else? I just want to say, Ms. Pittman, I've always been a firm believer in housing for educators. And to see the movement across the state now as far as trying to provide adequate housing for our beginning teachers, per se. And it's good to hear that how the units now, the districts, are beginning to collaborate together to find ways. And we all know that housing is a big issue in this state, the cost factor. That's what I'm saying. And I'm really pleased to hear your report and see the number of districts who are showing more interest in that. With I think I heard that Bertie County was looking at talking with Durham about their house there. And it's more than just housing, what I'm hearing now. It has to do with collaboration among these new beginning teachers around the kitchen table, around the TVs, and things of that nature. And that's what's so exciting to me. And also to hear from you, all of you, the excitement that we're hearing coming from these new teachers, and glad to be in the profession. And that can do nothing but bear, because if they are happy when they walk in the classroom, guess who else is going to be happy? Those little folk that they are there to deliver the curriculum to. And that's what's so exciting. As an old timer that came along right after the earth started cooling. But nothing has changed when it comes to a smile like on your faces now and the laughter. Nothing has changed when it comes to educating kids. It's just reaching out to them. And let me just shut up now. Yes, ma'am.
I would be remiss, I forgot to talk about when I was talking about the Promising Practices piece, which Dr. Mullinex owns, that the Promising Practices Clearinghouse is live now on the website, and you'll be able to see some of the work that's being done in the first 3 months, and the work that is promising coming up throughout the next few months. So you should be able to find that on the DPI website. You'll be able to track where it is on a heat map, and also track how it falls into line with Operation Polaris and the State Board Strategic Plan. So it's a really incredible website that's being developed as we speak, but it's definitely live right now for you to be able to dig in more on some of those issues.
Well, thank you so much for that.
Of course.
We've talked about that over the last 2 or 3 months, and hopefully you will avail yourself to that particular website.
Yes.
Ms. Pittman, thank you so much for presenting to us, and we look forward to hearing from you next month.
Next month. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we will move into the next agenda item. We will now have Mr. Jamie Falkenberry. Am I correct? Is that
Yes, sir.
last name? Thank you, sir. Who will share with us through a PowerPoint dealing with some priorities and things that the department is involved in and is seeking also. And then we will come back and share a little bit more about where the State Board and DPI is coming together to present a prioritized request before the GA in that short session. Mr. Faulkner.
Thank you, Chairman Hall. I really appreciate that introduction. Thank you. Yeah, let's start right there. Thank you for the opportunity to come present. First, I just wanted to say to everybody, congratulations. We made it through the longest session in long session in recorded history. I say in recorded history because apparently before 1965, they didn't really keep track of these dates as specific as they do now. But just to kind of highlight how long this session was, when Superintendent Truitt and her team came came into office, still a lot of our schools were still closed. The vaccine was just available to first responders. We were dealing with issues with Read to Achieve and trying to tackle that. And what were we going to do for summer school and all this? So I just wanted to show you some of the highlights that DPI, the state board, when Freebird McKinney was here and Carson Nelson with DPI were still here, all the legislation that we were able to help push through at the General Assembly to make a better difference for our state and for our students, and ending with the Appropriations Act. And so I just want to highlight this. I can share with you some additional notes too, but and you've already seen the slide in a previous presentation that we gave back in November, I believe. But when it comes to with Leandro, the General Assembly appropriated $1.5 billion in new recurring dollars. For K-12, I believe Leandro called for $1.7 billion, but there were many different buckets of money that were in this plan, in the budget that were also in the Leandro plan, and I'd be more than happy to walk through those in more detail later on. So for the legislative agenda for 2022 short session, we've kind of compartmentalized these into 4 buckets. First off, cleaning up and realigning general statutes for 22 and beyond. What I mean by this is we're working with the General Assembly to eliminate reports that no longer are necessary, help align words that are maybe out of date that the department or the field are not using anymore, and also addressing some cleanup when it comes to general statutes, and I'll focus on in a minute. But also want to focus on I think one of the major topics of conversation here is can you stay up there? On the major gaps, needs, and additions to the budget, which is Senate Bill 105. Building on previous initiatives and successes, and making tweaks where necessary. So as I just discussed, the cleaning up and realigning of general statutes, it's really just focusing on terms, definition, outdating reports, and outdated policies. I'll as soon as we get something drafted, I'll share with the entire board and all the department agency heads as well. Okay, I think we're going to focus on this for a little while, so we can just stay on this slide. But what we at the department, and working with the committee chair Hall and vice committee chair Kamnitz on, was trying to look at where any gaps in what we proposed to the General Assembly in the long session for the budget, and what are the gaps that we really need filled. Fortunately, because of the amount of federal money that came down to the state, along with revenues from state funds as well, we as a department and the state board got a lot, almost, I want to say everything, but almost everything that we had requested in some way or form, whether that be state or federal money. And so what we really want to do is be very focused and purposeful in these in these requests. And so the first one I want to focus on is the School Psychologist Internship Program. This was not funded in the budget. The General Assembly and the governor did fund one school psychologist for every single school district in the state. However, while that's a great step forward with for our mental health workers in our schools, we were just out with the superintendents, the local superintendents last week in Winston-Salem, and we were running through some of the provisions that we were going to ask for that would benefit them. And we brought this one up specifically. I just asked, since I had almost all of them in the room, I said, how many of you have been able, or either in the process or have been able to hire a school psychologist? And barely anybody raised their hand. And one of the superintendents lifted up his head. He says, we can't find them and they don't exist. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he says, we don't have a pipeline really for this. And this is what we've been seeing with the research that's going on all around the country. And states that have done this right, they have some type of internship program at the local level. So the funding that you see here is for one FTE, not one FTE, one internship per LEA that will allow for a new position that the General Assembly gave DPI, a recruitment counselor for school psychologists here at the department, for us to go out and recruit to these schools all across the country who are exporting more school psychologists than they actually have in their states. States like New York, Pennsylvania, and I think Illinois have more school psychologists, but most of these programs require an internship before you can graduate. We don't offer that really at the state level. So or in the state. So this is what we're requesting these funds, is to create that pipeline. And all the research and data shows that when you offer that internship, they more than likely stay in that internship and at least work a few years in that community that they put roots in. The next provision that we're requesting are 2 additional FTEs for the Office of Charter School. Since the charter school cap was lifted, we've had the same amount of consultants in the Office of Charter Schools from when we started, which I believe is about 6. And so at minimum, we're asking for 2 additional FTEs to help with the work, keep in compliance. I think we've seen a lot of issues pop up recently with 2 specific charter schools, and we're trying to make sure that our charter schools are not only supported, but that we're keeping everybody in compliance and following the law. And I was talking with Chairman Davis about this, and he even mentioned, he said, imagine having a school district of 200 schools and you only have 6 people there to support it, and that's what we're dealing with right now. Standards and curriculum. As many of you know, we have multiple standard course of study standards up for review for the next year. We also need to give Dr. Hemphill and her staff some more we have a great group of people over there, but more qualified people over there to really help ensure that we have the highest quality standards in the state or in the country. The next provision is the State Advisory Council and Indian Education have a liaison there. This is one that we've been working directly with the State Board of Education on. There used to be someone who handled this. It wasn't like a full-time FTE, but that position has kind of morphed into oblivion, and we're trying to bring that back so that we can really help ensure that our American Indian population is really taken care of in the state and has a voice. The next is additional cooperative innovative high schools. The state board approved 3 more. This is to allow those schools to have the funding to start. Next is the turnaround coaches, 8 FTEs. The General Assembly appropriated $18 million to help target the lowest performing schools and districts in the state. And when the original request that we gave the State Board of to the General Assembly was for about, I think, 180 FTEs. And the General Assembly at the time said that's a lot of FTEs. How about you prove your concept? And they wrote into legislation that it was the lowest performing, I believe, 80 schools and then 6 school districts. However, the funding that they appropriated us was only 10% of this $18 million. And after talking with Dr. Edmonds and her team and Dr. Cynthia Martin, we really do need, if we're going to show the General Assembly that DPI can do this right and with the turnaround model, we really do need these 8 additional FTEs, which are going to be turnaround coaches, to strategically go into, each FTE would go into 10 low-performing schools. So 8 FTEs times 10 is 80 schools. And then the next one, agency equity and recruitment funds. The department, just like a lot of state agencies, and considering the growth that North Carolina is seeing, when you have companies like Pendo down the street, Red Hat, SAS, recruiting our highest quality people for tech jobs, and also in our fiscal business services. We are losing high talent people to the private sector, even to other state agencies who can offer higher salaries. So just to make sure that the ship at DPI can keep moving and we can offer the best services to the district, we really do need to offer competitive salaries here at the state board. I believe Kevin Harrison is going to talk to you about school transportation and biz ops, so I'm not going to steal his thunder, but those are also tentatively on here as well. So next slide. And then one thing is, I'm not going to talk about the school transportation stuff, so Kevin Harrison can do that. But we will, go back up. My apologies. But we will, that first bullet point, we will be advocating for a cost of living salary increase for teachers and public sector employees to reflect the rise of inflation. At minimum, that's what we're going to request. We understand that always teacher salaries and principal salaries are always a high priority for all of us, but at minimum, we need to reflect the current status of what our country and our state are facing. Okay, and these next 2 slides, you can skip them. These are for the board if you want to see how these requests that we're making align with the Leandro plan, the State Board Strategic Plan, and Operation Polaris. Some other short session, these are more of the legislative items, not the budget items, is the TA to teachers. This was originally put in the 2018 budget. The General Assembly moved it from recurring to non-recurring. So first we want to work with the General Assembly to get these funds recurring again, but also change the program from an allotment formula to a grant formula. Right now there are a dozen, or I should say scores of districts that are listed in this legislation, but many of the districts can't even access it because they don't have the EPP or the community college nearby to even allow for these TA to teachers to the pipeline to work. So we're leaving money on the table. And listening to the field, and especially working with Julie Pittman on this, is why not turn this into a grant formula where you have a district like Robinson County who said, I think they only have 5 or 6 that they're able for. They tell us they can get almost near 30. So why would we not give them the opportunity to, if these funds are available, to do this? So those are the two-pronged approach that we're doing with this. And then secondly, working with the vice chair and chair of this committee, specifically on this one, is we have as I told you earlier, the school psychologist, we have one for all 115 LEAs. There's an FTE for that. However, if a district is unable to fill that, we would like to see some flexibility given so that the position can be used for any mental health support staff, whether that be a nurse or a social worker, or you name it. So, next slide. So building blocks required to tackle many of the issues and requests. And so the approach that we really had with the government affairs team is to keep chipping away at things. And that way, once we solve that, then we move to the next the issue that we see. And so I've already talked about mental health support staff, but CTE, workforce, new computer science division, as the superintendent, as you all know, this is the year of the workforce. So and with all the new job announcements that have been coming out of the state, which is quite remarkable, we'll be working with the General Assembly on how do we make sure that we have the pipeline to get these jobs here in North Carolina. Focusing on early literacy, what's next? We are cranking out the science of reading training and doing an incredible job at that, and about what is next. And that is a conversation we actually had with Senator Lee a few weeks ago. He really wants to focus on how is this plan sustainable and how do we continue to work on the progress. And then also supporting the summer academies and bridge programs that Dr. Michael Marr and OLR are working on. And then making tweaks where necessary. I've already explained the TAs to teachers one. Tom Tomerlin did a great job this morning doing the principal licensure. Human capital retention issues, Tom Tomerlin did that as well. And the flexibility for school support staff, which we mentioned above, that we're working on with the chairs of the committee. With that, I leave it for questions from anybody.
Vice Chair.
Yes, if we could go back to the Leandra slide. I'm just wondering, Mr. Falconberry, we're very grateful for the items that were approved, that were part of the comprehensive remedial plan. But can you give us a sense of how much of that plan was left unfunded, and maybe highlight some of the parts of that plan that were not funded?
So I have an extensive spreadsheet that I can definitely share with you that breaks it down. Okay, I'll do it this way. For example, there is in the Leandra plan, they call for, I think, a $2.5 billion bond to help with school construction. The General Assembly has given $600 million to do that right now. If they continue to do that provision, they get $400-500 million per budget. We will fix the school construction issues that Leandro focused on in 5 to 6 years, and the bond would take 10 years. So to answer you, and there's a lot of tidbits like that throughout there where we address pre-K at I'll pull it up. Let me pull up my cheat sheet right here. So for example, I don't remember exactly how much Leandro, because I don't have that in front of me, but Leandro called for an increase in expansion funding for Smart Start. The General Assembly, there it is, $10 million. Let me go down to one of these that's not on there. So provide services for school mental health needs. the state appropriated $31 million totaling $545 million for the state. Established funds for modifying school finance systems. That was funded at $84 million. It's going to take about $250, $300 million to do that, but it's incrementally going to happen as we finish the project. So I know I didn't get a specific dollar amount for you, but that's because it's a kind of a rolling tally as the General Assembly
We can
chips
send
away at it. Yeah.
board members the spreadsheet that's very specific about how much and what.
And it would, so for example, you've got for the partial funding, you would be, so we got partial funding for Smart Start. What proportion of the?
So it lines it up. So if if Leandro said, I'm making up this number because I don't have it in front of me, but say Leandro remedial plan said we wanted $15 million for it, it will say in the spreadsheet 9.8 million. It will say the 15, and it will say how much was funded, and then so partially funded. Yep. And then other things were like redesigning how we do merit pay and all this, all that other stuff. Like that's Human Capital Roundtable and the work that you were seeing this morning with Dr. Tomberlin. So.
On this
Vice Chair
topic,
Duncan?
thank you. On this topic, you may recall the Supreme Court sent this case to Judge Robinson, who's now been assigned to hear it in the specific purpose of the assignment was within 30 days to provide what Judge Robinson's assessment was as to what was included in the budget that was part of the comprehensive plan, and the state is to provide, I believe it's the end of this week, the state is to provide the information as to what it believes that amount to be. So there will be a specific filing by the state this week, and then he has set up a schedule for the parties to brief off of that afterwards, and then he'll have a hearing all within a very compact 30-day period. But that'd be much more precise answer that's forthcoming shortly.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
I can't be more elated to see an item in this request to the General Assembly around the State Advisory Council on Indiana. I have just sent a text and said, hold on, we haven't gotten there yet. But I'm telling everyone, guess what? So, but I want to make sure of this may be a little bit weedish, but I want to be sure about this. So the way it's presented in the spreadsheet, support to SACE, is that, if it's funded, is that the way it will appear, let's say, in a statute?
So it would probably show up in a money report, right? Yeah, it would show up in the money report, and then they would give a brief description on what, and we would work with the General Assembly.
We could work out the fine tuning.
And I'm working with our Chief of Staff Shelby Armentrout about all the details of this and what else they would do as well to support the American Indian population.
Yes. Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dine. As Mr. Falkenberg mentioned earlier during this presentation, we used to have this position here years ago. You remember Betty Magna?
Well, listen, she's right here.
Oh, she's right here. She's right inside your phone. Okay. Well, she was the one who handled it during that day, and we were happy to be a part of this collaboration and putting that together. Now, what you have before you, any other questions for Jamie at this point? Hearing none, what you have before you is a sheet that's in green and white. If you look at the green items, that's colored green. These are the items that the committee, State Board Committee, and DPI agreed upon. We're all together. We agree that these things should go forth in our short session. Now remember, we're only discussion today. It's been changed from action to a discussion item today. And the things that I'm going to talk about along with my vice chair is recurring dollars. We have to move and look at recurring dollars and ask for that. We can't wait. We can't wait much longer, any longer, to get these resources out to these children that is in desperate need of. Example, we agree with the 115 psychologists and the flexibility. Hopefully we can't find if the unit can't find a psychologist. Where I'm from, I can tell you now, we have 2 days of one. We don't have resources to buy that one, but she doesn't want to work for us full time. She's partial herself out to 3 other units. So I fully understand that. I've seen some data that shows the number of school psychologists, and it's a 1 beside my district, and that's not true. It should be a quarter versus the 4-1. So it's sort of misleading there with what I was reading here recently. But we're in agreement. We also is in agreement with the Principal Fix, my coworker, my colleague. We also with the increase in transportation. We heard last month, what about a $10 million shortfall it's looking like with the price of diesel fuel? I was coming through town this morning. It's $5.99 where I come from. And those buses only get about 12 miles a gallon, if they get 12. Unfortunately, we can't get one of those electric buses to go on because they cost $400,000. So, right now, we're dealing with some unknowns when it comes to transportation. The 2 full-time FTEs for charter school, absolutely. Charter schools have grown. They're over 200 and some odd schools now across the state, and they need more than 6 people. So we're in agreement. The committee that I chair. Yes, cost of living. I call it cost of living there for our educators and our staff out there. Someone even mentioned a minute ago, my colleague down the end here, about some of our teachers came on during the mid time of the COVID. And everyone stood ground, and we hopefully we've made a turning point there. But it's because of we stood there and we did our job, and people need to be compensated for it. I'm going to keep saying this: recurring dollars. That's what we're looking at. The positions that the model now that we're hoping will be fully funded with this request that DPI is making. For our turnaround school model. Right now we're in 80 schools and 24 districts, I believe I was told earlier. I don't know if that's in legislation or has to be that way, but that's where we are now. And we are thinking. We are thinking. Why? Because of the 181 recurring low-performing schools that hasn't been touched. And that's one of the add-ons that the committee wants to add on to this request, is to fund 98 additional positions to go along with school turnaround, so that we can reach these 181. As long as they stay out there with no additional help, the worse it's going to get. Now, these figures, I understand, is 18, 19 figures. Am I correct in that understanding? It could be more than. It could be less. I don't know if it will be, but I doubt it. But it could be more than 181. Those children need help, and hopefully this turnaround model, similar to what we have in Northampton, that's going on, that would help us to reach these 181 other chronically low-performing school districts that's in the state. So we want to add that to this list. We also want to add, as you will look on the cheat sheet, I call it, looking at, and it's not up there yet. We just talked about this other. No. We also want to add approximately $15 million to the request, short term, recurring monies for social workers throughout the state in our public school system. Social workers. Yeah, I was reminded here recently that school psychologists diagnose. They tell what's going on, but social workers get out there and do the work. Like clothing, housing, meals. Kids who come to school from homes that they have viewed child abuse, mom abuse, you name it. Social workers are truly a key component of us moving forward with providing intervention strategies for our SEL, social emotional learning, mental health. So we're asking for $15 million for that item. We are also looking at $15 million to go to the, like I said, the 98 additional positions that we're looking at. It's approximately $15 million also. Those two items, along with what you have presented, is a good starting point for us. And I'm going to repeat again for the umpteenth time, recurring dollars. We can't depend on CARES because pretty soon it's going to be gone. I think, 23 or 24, about the last time, those dollars are going to be around anyway. So I'm pleading from the committee, State Board Chair and Madam Superintendent and Vice Chair, let's get some of this stuff together now. We have enough time now for discussion. There might be some other items that we might look at. But I believe now is the time. If not now, then when? If not us, then who's going to do it?
I don't know that I can add anything to what you just said, Wendell.
I get so passionate about this stuff. And these kids, I hear you talk about it, Ms. White, time and time again. These children, we have to meet their needs. We have to put schools out here. I hear you saying, and I know you believe it's in your heart. I believe it's just as hard. That these 181 kids, now by the way, there are over 400 low-performing schools. We're just talking about, that those ones who continue to show up, recurring. What can we do to help them? Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say. Mr. Vice Chair, anybody?
I just have one other, thank you so much. Yes, I get really passionate sitting by you. I just can't.
Well, I'm glad somebody's going to mind sitting next to me.
But my question goes to the internship, the Psychologist internship program. I know it's very hard to find psychologists around the state, especially in the low wealth areas, in particular. But my question has to, an internship in my mind is going to be connected to an EPP. So how are we going to even find the students in school psychology to go into these internships?
Could you scroll down 2 slides, or maybe just 1 slide? One more. Okay, so up 1. Okay, so this lays out our plan. I try to put more, but you don't want to put so much in a PowerPoint. But I can give you a more detailed plan. What works in other states that do this right is they have a full-time person at their state education agency, so DPI, that goes out and recruits at EPPs and brings them in. Other states have more students than they have jobs for in their states. And we are going to specifically target with this new position that the General Assembly has given us to be the recruitment person, to go contact those EPPs, say, you come down here, your student will get $36,000 or whatever it is, plus whatever the locals want to put on top of that to incentivize them to come down. And that's the work that's done. And the research and data that shows that states that are doing this program, it's paying dividends because those interns then stay in those communities for multiple years after they finish it up. And almost, from our understanding, almost every program requires some type of internship.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think we need to also consider is, and this is an idea that I've already planted in my own head, is that we were going to have to encourage our EPPs to begin school psychology programs. You know, we have our school counseling programs and we have our clinical counseling, but I would like to know how many of our EPPs actually offer a major concentration. It would have to be a master's degree level.
We could look into that for you. What we're really focusing on are really the states that have more than they know what to do with, and we're going to incentivize them to come down here. Some states don't offer. I mean, what we're proposing to the General Assembly is a salary of the same as a first-year teacher, as you're still a full-time student, basically.
It's a great
Yeah.
idea.
I think I heard when we were talking the last time together that West Virginia is one of those states.
I gotta pull it up. I think that might be one of them.
Pennsylvania is one of those states
Yep.
that we might be visiting to look for these interns.
Students.
Right, and bring them here. But I think it's a great idea also to go in that, to take that avenue to trying to find individuals to come here and work in our great state. But I also want to add, and I said 98 staff members to fully fill out the assistance team. I understand that they are just out here, and you're just like going to pick up flowers. I understand that, but I also know if it's recurring dollars, it puts some stability that if I sign on, it's not going to be a two-year venture. With these recurring dollars, we can do a long-term commitment to these individuals that we're talking about. Mr. Superintendent, you understand what I'm saying?
I do. And then what you said about other states is true. In recruiting out of state, we've seen that some states, you mentioned Pennsylvania, for instance, many of the teachers there are dually certified. And that's not exactly what we're talking about now, but say it might be middle grades, ELA and social studies, but they also have all of them, all the teacher ed majors will have a degree in special education and a certification therein. So, I mean, that seems to me to be a pathway to explore at least.
It's a pipeline.
Right.
Right. You know, so we got to think about this thing a little bit different than we have in the. And somebody said, well, you know, money is not it. Money will attract. Don't tell me it won't. It's how you never get enough of that stuff. Don't nobody see it. You know, billionaires never get enough of being billionaires. They don't just give the money back. You know, I don't know that lady doing it though. But anyway, that's where I think we are headed. Have a stable workforce. And by the way, these 98 people, they're going to be master teachers, master trainers, folk that really know how to lead a school district from low performing to better performing to being an excellent school district. And that's what we're all about. Leandro, is still out there. We recognize that. But I hope that we will come together and present something that, might be outside the box. I understand that. But dadgummit, let's do it. And let's get it done. I'll be with you about a superintendent. Let me get over here. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So your passion is contagious, and I think everyone in this room is ready to make some legacy changes in the way we educate children, and I think we've all shown that by our commitment to early literacy, our commitment to the teacher pipeline and compensation model that we have, to the state board's strategic plan and Operation Polaris. There's a couple of things that I would like for the board to consider when thinking about what to advocate for in this short session. So I'll start with the social workers request. One of the things that I would like to do between now and when the board has to vote is really try and get a statewide picture of the availability of social workers. So we know that some, just like with psychologists and why we're allowing the flexibility for school psychologists, some districts probably don't have trouble finding social workers, other districts will have trouble. And right now, I think what I suspect will give the General Assembly pause is that there's $19 million in gear money that hasn't been spent yet, that is specific to mental health workers for districts. And then there is, of course, the billions of dollars in federal monies that have not been spent yet, that will likely be extended. The deadline for that spending will likely be extended by the federal government. I think that I will also share with the board that in talking with Dr. Edmonds about this work a couple of months ago and recently, the plan that I know that we're anxious to support all schools, and that is certainly a worthy goal. This model, while not new to DPI, is new to a lot of the people who are working in the model. This is a model that goes back to, the model of school turnaround is a model that goes back to Race at the Top. And it makes me very nervous to think that we're going to jump in with 181 schools and hundreds of positions when we have not seen this model work yet in this day and age. Our plan has always been, and again, I'm taking my advice from Dr. Edmonds, the plan has always been to get this model working in these 6 districts and 80 schools that we will have funding for if we get the 8 positions funded. That's what the $18 million was for. And then once we show that it's working and the money has expired, we will have another long session and we will ask for recurring dollars because we will be able to show the General Assembly that the results are there. So I would just ask the board to remember that with billions of dollars of unspent money, that yes, it will expire. It's not recurring. That it will be difficult to get those requests over the finish line.
Thank you so much for those comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
And being candid and open about it.
Thank you.
That's what we're here for.
Absolutely.
You know. I think I've taken up more than my time. Mr. Chairman, any comments?
Not unless there's other comments from colleagues.
Mr. Vice Chair?
I appreciate the thoughts as you've expressed them. Thank you for the passion that you bring with it and the obvious caring for children.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Vice Chair?
I just, with all due respect, I have to say that I just don't know how we can tell those children that they have to wait, that are the children that are sitting in these chronically low-performing schools. We have to do something to support their academic growth and what we know of their social emotional needs.
I think we are in other ways. I think that the $38 million spent on the Excellence in Public Schools Act and providing, that is the most important thing we can do for the trajectory of those elementary age children. And we also are building in supports for those districts through the Office of Learning Recovery, and in a way that we haven't before, in a way that we've not been able to before. And so I don't think that we're necessarily telling children to wait. I think that there are a lot of unknowns. I mean, I'm worried about the burden on just in hiring all these people that it will have on both our financial business services as well as the local finance offices. I mean, there's a lot of other things to consider, and I'm happy to have further conversations with all of you, either individually or in committee calls.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I would just encourage you all to also discuss some of these with Dr. Edmonds. I think she's out sick today, but just to ensure that whatever money we request, that we can fulfill that job here at DPI, and we're not spreading ourselves too thin. I completely agree with you. We need to help those kids, and I was speaking with Superintendent Truitt and others in the department, and even if those funds, whether General Assembly appropriates them or not, we here at the department stand ready and willing to help all those districts, and they have billions of dollars to help provide services as well. So we're able to help them with Dr. Marr's team, Dr. Edmonds' team, and Dr. Cynthia Martin too.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to end by saying I think this will show how we're trying to work together, regardless, but we're reaching out to one another. And you can keep this sheet because it's going to change probably by the time you see it again next month. But thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to present the Governmental Relations, Community Relations Committee report, Ms. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
Back
Hall.
to you.
We'll now turn to the Student Learning and Achievement Committee chaired by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
I was looking at the wrong document. Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine, and I think we're setting, you talked about, Mr. Falconberry talked about the longest long session. I think this is the shortest SLA agenda in history. Maybe not, I don't know when we started keeping records, but. Starting off with an item of new business, an update on secondary literacy supports. The question was asked at our last meeting when we were talking about the letters work and getting a report from the early literacy team. The question was asked about what we are doing for the children who are not in those grades and who still need help with their reading skills. And so this is in response to that question to give us an idea of what's happening 6 through 12. So Dr. Day.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to represent some working groups across the agency with the literacy supports that we've provided with secondary grades. Before we jump into some of those specific supports, I wanted to frame secondary literacy around struggling readers, and that's really where we're going to concentrate on the support that we've been providing. This is a continuum thinking of struggling readers in the secondary grades. It begins with core instruction for all students across all disciplines. So when we're talking about secondary literacy in particular, we're talking about all content areas. ELA teachers English teachers have students for about 90 minutes, and then the rest of the day they have their other content area teachers. So we're talking about how to support the whole school, all content areas with literacy. So they are providing quality instruction, literacy instruction based on their content. What does that look like in science, math, social studies, the arts, and so on. This also encompasses students getting the necessary supports from teachers when certain skills need to be reviewed or accelerated, depending on where those gaps are. Struggling readers performing considerably below grade level need more targeted and intensive interventions. This could include work with foundational skills via a specialized block, or work with a specialist if we're thinking about those programs that help support those struggling readers that are reading well below. It is important to note that this is a continuum and that students can travel across based on their specific needs and gaps. So we help support teachers with understanding how to know where their students are, which leads into the next slide, which highlights the importance of monitoring student progress in the secondary grades. And some teachers really need support. When we think about secondary teachers, they come out of their program very content heavy. And so looking at student progress and understanding where they fall on that as a student, so needs support in a lot of cases, and that is something that we'll talk about in just a minute with the supports that we have in place. Secondary teachers should be comfortable generally evaluating students' reading abilities and accelerating their reading. When monitoring student progress, teachers are determining if they're able to read appropriately complex text, if they're reading below grade level but above grade 3, or if they're reading well below grade 3. And where they fall on that depends on what kind of supports, depending on the student, they'll need. If they are falling below grade level but grade 3 or above, scaffolding in place plus some fluency work is what is backed with the research. If they're falling below grade 3, they need more intensive supports with science of reading aligned foundational skills. They need that phonemic awareness, phonics, that intensive support. These are just a few guiding principles that we talk with teachers about that they should feel empowered to be able to do in their classroom. They want to be knowledgeable about how literacy is a vehicle for their content. So if we're talking to a social studies teacher, science teacher, how does literacy work within that content? They also should feel empowered to evaluate their students' reading ability and knowing how to scaffold when they are falling below that grade level complex text or that content. So we're meeting students where they are and scaffolding up. We also want teachers to feel empowered to know what those scaffolds are and where to go when they need that support. And that leads us into working with specialists and support staff when they encounter some of those intensive instructional challenges. This slide highlights a few EC division initiatives that support building capacity across the state with adolescent literacy. As the EC division collaborates with districts to analyze student and district data for the LEA self-assessment or their NC-SIP implementation plan, some districts target adolescent literacy evidence-based practices as a focus for improvement. Teachers and administrators are invited to attend Reading Research to Classroom Practice or the Reading Research to Classroom Practice overview for administrators in order to understand the science of reading and create a common understanding of reading development and components of a healthy core. To directly support implementation and building a common vision for a school-wide literacy plan based on the science, district literacy teams are invited to the Adolescent Literacy Overview, where they come together and analyze data, think about those critical cultural questions to determine their school's readiness for change. The purpose of Adolescent Literacy Overview is to create and sustain a school-wide literacy plan that is designed to meet the needs of all literacy levels in the building within a sustainable framework. What we pay attention to grows, and investing time in planning for a school-wide literacy approach at the leadership level brings the effort front and center. So once they go through this adolescent literacy overview, they talk about 6 major components within school-wide planning, and then they are offered supports beyond that, such as classroom visit fidelity tools and training, regional opportunities to participate in the coaching basics, and then an involvement in the adolescent literacy community of practice. Some other specific supporting resources that the department, specifically the Division of Academic Standards, provides. This will probably look familiar. I've talked about this a lot. The literacy instruction standards. With SB 387, the working groups created literacy instruction standards. And to support grades beyond just what that legislation calls for, we extended the LIS pre-K through 12. So those we have 8 anchored components for secondary grades: reading materials, academic language and vocabulary, comprehension, discussion and writing, comprehension strategy instruction, comprehension knowledge building, writing, observation and assessment, and engagement. So grounded within these 8 components, the LIS, Literacy Instruction Standards, help secondary teachers think about their core and how to support those struggling readers. There's also an adolescent literacy guide that was released in 2019. This is based on the IES guide, Improving Adolescent Literacy, Effective Classroom and Intervention Practices. The IES guides lay out guidance and support and key recommendations in very verbose, long documents. So what they did was they took components of that, they put videos, they put graphics to help make the information consumable in little bites for teachers. So there's been support and PD about this with this guide, and we consulted with EC and IABS on this work. The reading accelerators were brought forward to ELA leaders last month to think about how to support adolescent literacy across these core components. Foundational supports for struggling readers, thinking about fluency, word level recognition, phonemic awareness, phonics, reading self-efficacy, comprehension of complex text, and then it goes into vocabulary, and we know how important knowledge building is in the ELA classroom, but in all content areas. And of course, the communication, so the discourse and the writing around text. So there are a few documents that ELA leaders have been trained on, and we will continue that support. That was just last month, so we'll continue that support beyond just the ELA leaders. A few professional development opportunities that have recently taken place. As I mentioned, the ELA Leaders Meeting was in March, and it concentrated just on adolescent literacy and the supports that leaders can put in place for their district. The Friday Institute's Literacy and Equity Summit, there was a session that our team facilitated on adolescent literacy. Then you can see a few others there. The last bullet is targeted district supports. We have had several requests from districts to provide secondary teachers, not just ELA or English teachers, support with literacy in 6 through 12. Some upcoming supports. The literacy instruction standards will roll out. We will begin face-to-face training in June for leaders, and then we will plan out a extensive year-long plan next year of how to support that with teams of teachers from schools coming together, not just a teacher here, a teacher there. We want the teams to come together to really think about literacy across all content areas. The Writing Institute, that is something that was planned but was delayed due to COVID. We were going to have a summer Writing Institute specifically looking at how to explicitly teach and assess writing. So sometimes we get the question, well, I gave this prompt, but my students didn't really meet that prompt. I'm not really sure where to go from there. So we're going to talk about how do you teach those writing standards, and then how do you assess? How do you look at student writing and give them feedback in a way that's very productive? We'll also host a webinar series with collaboration across other content areas in the division, particularly science and vocabulary is huge. Understanding that vocabulary to prepare for the content within science. And then the last one will be a Canvas course. This is fairly new. We're still investigating costs and what this will look like. There is a course from the Liebens, some national literacy experts. It's called Improve Your Reading for Older Students, and it sets the stage for science of reading foundations for 6 through 12 teachers. So we are able to buy a license and adapt as we need to for our state. So we plan to pilot that this fall, and then pair it with face-to-face hybrid sessions. So we'll do a facilitation from DPI as part of the course. We'll come together and have conversations with the teachers, with the participants, and then we hope to scale that up once the pilot is complete. And one other thing that's not on here that was released last week, there's a new IES guide providing reading intervention for students in grades 4 through 9. It's a 205-page document. So not all teachers can just flip through the 205 pages. So we will take that and make that into something that teachers can easily access and learn from and discuss. And that's all.
Any questions for Dr. Day?
Not a question, but a compliment. I'm so glad to see this focus on the professional development around the teaching reading, specifically for the older student. Mm-hmm. I did a couple of awareness sessions in my region recently with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers on the science of reading, just an awareness. And I think that's something that I hope we think about, because otherwise I'm afraid the science of reading might turn out to be a cliche, and we don't want that. But I think the more we begin talking about science of reading across all grades, so that all the teachers, regardless of they understand and know the vernacular and know the mission and focus and the research, so that it just doesn't go away. So
Yes.
This focus on adolescent literacy is marvelous.
We've received lots of questions, and we've also heard from some districts when we did the ELA Leaders Meeting that some districts who are a little bit further along in letters, they're asking their elementary coaches to come talk to the middle and high school teachers around what's happening. So it stays in district and those conversations and trainings take place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this consideration.
It almost sounds to me like one of the things you're doing is building an awareness on the part of teachers that they are, that in the secondary grades, that they still do have this responsibility for the reading skills of their students, and if they can't help directly, to find the help that's needed and change that mindset a little bit.
I think that's the first step, the awareness piece first, and then we can go a little bit further and help train them further. There's some hesitation sometimes because secondary teachers don't necessarily feel comfortable. They weren't trained. So helping them become aware and then building in some of those supports, such as a Canvas course, reading research, classroom practice, or whatever it may be.
Other questions? Thank you, Dr. Day. We have one item that is an action on first read. Recommendations for appointments to the Military Interstate Children's Compact Commission. Dr. Stigall.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Truitt, Chair Davis, and State Board members. I have before you, and I bring to you recommendations for the appointment to the Military Interstate Children's Compact Commission, also known as MIC3. According to North Carolina statute, the state MIC3 Council is composed of a compact commissioner appointed by the governor. It's composed of a state superintendent of public instruction, a superintendent of a school district with a high concentration of military-connected children, a representative from a military installation, a representative from the House of Representatives as well as the Senate, and additionally any other military family education liaison and other council members that the council needs to add. We do have 2 vacancies that need to be filled. To fill these vacancies on the state council, it is recommended to approve the appointments of Dr. Robert Jackson, Superintendent of Carteret County Schools. He will fill the role of Superintendent of a school district vacancy. We also bring to you Ms. Kim Rice Smith of the Craven County Board of Education, and she would represent the military installation vacancy. You have both of the resumes for your review.
Any questions on these 2 appointments? Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Stigall. And we can all send good wishes to Dr. Mullenix as we think about this one, because this is something that she's worked hard on and is very involved with. We have one action item, SLA 2, is read to achieve the alignment of literacy curriculum and instruction to comply with SB 387. We heard about this in some depth last month. Dr. Day, are you going to give us a quick reminder?
Hi again. Just a reminder from last month, we do not have any changes. We brought forward some updates on the literacy instruction practices. We have the standards and they were approved, and then we worked on the practices, so we brought that forward as an update. We also brought forward the model implementation plan that will be rolled out to districts per SB 387, and then the non-model plan with the explanation that will also be rolled out and district leaders will be trained on. So those were the 3 updates. The actions were the revisions. There were a few minor revisions to the pre-K literacy instruction standards, so that will be up for action, as well as the LEA curriculum and instruction form, which is what districts will fill out, turn back into DPI. We take a look and give support where needed. There were no changes. I just wanted to update. A CAO survey went out on the literacy instruction standards and their practices. We received 256 responses. They could pick a grade band or multiple grade bands if they would like. Overwhelmingly, they're very satisfied with the LIS. Their questions and comments came in the terms of implementation. How will this be supported and implemented? So we are working on what that plan will look like to make sure that those supports are in place.
Questions for Dr. Day? Thank you. Finally, we have one consent item, and I will just briefly outline what this is. It's not a little more than a couple of sentences, but just to make it clear. This is a report to the JLEOC on student digital learning. A student digital learning access dashboard will collect annually PSU information on student home connectivity and computer access away from school. It requires the development of a survey platform and collection tool to report on the required data points each March 15th. This dashboard is under development. As part of the development, the annual North Carolina Digital Learning Media Inventory report will be consolidated into a new student digital learning access dashboard. Consolidating both required inventory reports will ease the burden on PSUs, which is always a good thing. We know how many reports are required. This work will also incorporate the revised North Carolina Digital Learning Plan data points. The timeline for this project to be completed is June of 2023, and the report will be made available to the State Board on August 1st, 2023, and to the JLEOC on August 15th, 2023. And that is the end of the student learning and teaching report.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Let's take a 10-minute break and be back at 3:05. 3:05.
and have, I know many of you were disappointed we had to wait till the end of the day today with our usual exciting series of events, but we'll hopefully end it here on a real uplifting moment. We seriously have some important things before us today. Our first item is an action on first read, which is approval of contracts over $500,000. We have 6 such contracts that are before us. We have short presentations on each, and for each of these, I'm going to ask that the presenter make clear whether the contract's required by statute or some regulations that exist. Second, whether the vendor is identified by statute, which is the case for some of these contracts, by a bid method or some other procurement method. Third, whether there are any changes in cost. If this is a contract that in some ways taken the place of service we're already receiving, is there any change in cost from what we've previously been paying? And finally, the purpose of the contract. So that would be all helpful information, and we'll start to try to standardize that so the board members can get that, because those are questions often asked. Our first one is a SAS EVAS renewal contract, and I think Dr. Tomberlin has that. All right. That was a very efficient report. Hopefully he will back. Let's keep going and make good use of our time, and we'll come back. Our second one is school connectivity internet services, and Mike Ramsey has a report on this.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, board members, good afternoon. School Connectivity Initiative is established by statute in SL 2007-323 to be used for providing broadband internet access, equipment, and support services that create, improve, and sustain equity of access for instructional opportunities for public school students and educators. The proposed contract that we have would enable school connectivity to provide internet access to the public schools through NCDIT for the next 10 years. It's a 5-year contract with 5 one-year renewals optional. We did place a invitation for bids back in February. We got about 11 vendors that responded to it. I'm briefly going through the summary here. And we're choosing to separate out internet, firewall, and content filtering, and just awarding internet, which is what's before you right now. This, excuse me.
Bless you.
The internet access is eligible for E-rate program discounts, provided DPI submits a required funding request by March 22nd, which we did meet that. Due to this deadline is partly why we separated out the internet part. After careful analysis of all the bids received and a lot of negotiation, we chose NCDIT to provide that internet access. This is a reduction in cost by 40% over last year. The review team will continue evaluation of bids for the firewall and content filtering, and we intend to present our recommendations to the May board meeting. This is funded by legislative funding for the School Connectivity Initiative, which is now 15 years old. As I said, it is eligible for E-rate discounts. We're going to get back about 70%. We pay the full bill, apply to E-rate. We receive 70% back, and that 70% is used to pay for the content filtering and firewall services. We recommend that the board approve the attached memorandum of understanding with DIT, and I stand by for questions.
Thank you, and I want to especially thank you and your colleagues for the work done in the bid procurement process. I know that was extensive work, and appreciate very much the effort you put into it. Are there questions on this important contract, obviously? All right, not seeing any, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go on to our next one, the Research Triangle Institute, RTI Amendment Number 2. I believe Ms. Melissa Davis is here to report on that. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
RTI provides technical assistance and consulting to districts participating in the Rethink Ed initiative. This initiative is fully funded by a U.S. Department of Education grant. RTI was named in the original grant application as a partnering organization to assist with implementation of the Rethink Ed program. The purpose of this amendment is to modify the payment schedule for year 2, option year 1, for the contract between Rethink Ed and Research Triangle Institute International. RTI and NCDPI originally entered into a fixed price contract that allowed RTI to provide districts consulting and change management support in 45 Tier 1 districts. However, we had a delayed scale up of participating PSUs. RTI, and because of this, RTI and NCDPI have modified the payment schedule to adjust for the actual number of participating districts. This amendment will modify the payment schedule and changes the payment from a bi-monthly to monthly, and it allows for a sliding scale payment based on the number of PSUs being served each month. The deliverables and the scope of work remain the same for RTI. We currently have 24 districts that have signed on for implementation support. 21 of those plans have been completed by RTI and are currently being implemented. 3 plans are under development, and so we have 21 additional slots if anyone, if any districts are interested in opting in on that. But basically, we are keeping their scope of work the same, their deliverables are the same, but instead of having a bi-monthly payment plan, we're going to a monthly payment, and it's based on the individual cost for the PSUs.
So board members, this is a modified contract to fit the scale of the projects for those PSUs who are interested. Dr. Oxenbach.
Yes, thank you so much, Vice Chair Duncan. Just if you could, I don't want to take up very much time, but I am curious about what exactly is Rethink Education?
Rethink Ed is a program that is an initiative of NCDPI, but it is funded through a U.S. Department of Ed grant. Our purpose is to provide professional development around blended instructional strategies. We also provide technical assistance support through our partnership with RTI. Basically what that means is 45 of our Tier 1 districts, initially it was written for Tier 1 districts, could opt in to receive technical support from RTI to help them implement different plans in their districts. The best way I could describe that is to give you some examples of what that looks like right now. RTI is currently working with, I said 24, we have 21 completed plans. Some of the examples are they're helping districts develop and implement district-wide frameworks for blended learning. They're increasing, we have districts who want to increase parent and community engagement, so they're working with them to do that. We have districts that are working on all sorts of blended learning initiatives that are district-wide. We have some that are launching virtual and blended academies. We have implementation of instructional frameworks to advance STEM and blended learning. We have one district's developing plans for parent academies and administrator academies. And there's some strategic planning around virtual academies with the overall emphasis on blended learning. So those are just some examples of the work that RTI is doing. My team of PD consultants, they're working with partnering districts to train facilitators who can go back into the districts and train other teachers to become blended instructors. And then our third component is content. We're developing K through 8 online, high-quality, standards-aligned content that will be made available and is currently made available online through Go Open NC
and Canvas Commons. And we currently have grades 6th, 7th, and 8th grade mathematics available online for all districts in the state to access on Canvas Commons at no cost to them. Along with that content are parent guides, and so it's really a robust program.
That is excellent. Thank you so much for that clarity. And the other question I would have, do you have a list of the LEAs that are, or the PSUs that are involved?
I do.
I would love to, maybe you could just provide that through the state board office.
I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
Ms. White.
Perfect question. Did I hear you say there were 21 spots available?
There are 21 spots available, and initially the grant was written to only serve Tier 1 districts. But after multiple attempts to get all of our Tier 1 districts to sign on, for various reasons, they all didn't. So because of that, we opened it up to Tier 2 and Tier 3 districts as well. We're currently serving 19 Tier 1 districts through this work. We are currently serving 3 Tier 2 districts and 2 Tier 3 districts.
And so one follow, if those, since it's federal money, what happens if that money is left unspent?
It's reverted. We have until July of 2023 to spend the money, but you know, the federal government doesn't really like it when you don't stay with the plan and spend the money at a certain, you know, time frame and such. So we have to modify our budget to adjust for that.
Yes, ma'am. So, yep, I won't even.
The modification is intended to hopefully get greater participation so that we don't get to the place that you referred to.
Yes, sir.
The R word.
Exactly.
All right.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Our next item, our contract, is MicroPack Tyler Technologies, and this is again Dr. Tomberlin. Is he here yet? All right, so he has 2 items now. Let's keep going though. 5th item is North Carolina State University CS Discovery, Computer Science Discoveries and Principles. This is through the Friday Institute contracted, and we have Ms. Shanika Brightwell here for this contract. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Okay, so the North Carolina Computer Science Initiative seeks to expand computer science opportunities to all of our scholars in North Carolina. This is documented in the report that was submitted to the Joint Legislative Education Committee, Oversight Committee, State Legislation 2017-157, Part 6. So in order to support these goals, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction will seeks to partner with the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation to train middle school and high school educators in computer science discoveries and computer science principles courses. So this agreement, we would like to start the month of April, and it would extend out through June of 2025. That's mainly it.
All right. I believe this is your first appearance before
Yes.
the board. I just want you to know you're doing a great job, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Ms. Brightwell? All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
I think I saw Dr. Tomberlin
Tomberlin
hobbling in.
There it is.
Sorry to make you work overtime. So, Dr. Tomberlin, we have 2 contracts. The first one's a SAS EVAS renewal, and the other one is the MicroPack Tyler Technologies contract listed for you. And if you missed it, we're looking for sort of part of the report, a request, whether this is by statute or regulation or some other form, whether the vendor's identified by statute, bid, or some other procurement method, changes in cost, if any, from previous contracts for the same service, should that apply. And then the purpose of the contract, which you cover undoubtedly anyway. So with that background, welcome. I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry to make you limp around that much.
That's fine. Sorry I was late. So the EVOS contract is our standard EVOS reporting system. And this is a 3-year contract with them. This is the EVOS is identified in statute as being a requirement for the state. And in this case, EVOS as a vendor is specifically named in statute. So we do not do an RFP or I do believe this represents a nominal increase over the previous contract, just kind of inflation, but there's nothing new in the contract in terms of services that are being delivered as part of this.
All right, great. Any questions on this one? This is probably what we've had this contract for 15 or more years.
So we originally got the contract for this at the state level, I think around 2013.
Okay.
After Race to the Top, but individual school districts. So I used to work in CMS. They've had that contract for a number of years beyond that.
All right, very good. And then your other item is the MicroPact Tyler Technologies contract.
Yes, sir. So licensing of our educators is in statute. But of course, the online system is not specifically stated as a requirement for the state, and certainly a vendor is not identified in that. MicroPact, Tyler Technologies is our current vendor. As the board may know, we are in the midst of a procurement process, and so this contract is to continue for 1 year with the option of exercising for 2 years as we determine the new system that the state will use, and to allow for concurrency while we shift from one system to another.
So you're hopeful, obviously, that we use no more than one of the optional years, but that depends on how concurrency works.
That's right.
Very good. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Tomlin?
I have a very quick question about the EVOS contract.
Yes, ma'am.
With SAS, you said it was an increase from the past contract period.
If it is, it's a small increase. There's nothing there. The increase is not related to new services or products we would be requesting under that contract.
Would those type of increases, regardless of the percentage, would that be in some type of agreement that there would be those inching up of contract amounts? Would that be understood in a contract?
I'm sorry, we're referring to something else.
That's the increase in the dollar amount for the contract for this period is that. Do we have some contractual obligation with EVOS that it will increase by a certain percentage over a contract period, or is that just our negotiations with them?
That would probably be up to negotiation.
Right. I can get information on the size of this and whether it is just a
So that
is
it
a
is
kind
an
of
arbitrary.
It is not. I do not believe in the SAS contract itself. We have a contract line that says the value of the contract will increase by X percent every time you renew the contract. I do not believe that's in there. I think what this is, if this is an increase, it's just reflecting cost, inflation or just continued use. But I can check on that.
If you would, because
absolutely.
I'm no lawyer, but I would think there should be some language even to that effect, that there would be some understanding among all parties that there would be incremental increases.
And I do apologize that I don't know if this is an increase or not. It could be that it's not an increase. So I will check that and get back.
Thanks very much.
All right, very good. Dr. Tomlin, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on then to BizOp 2, which is policy amendment modifications to the allotment policy manual on 3 specific items. I think Jennifer Bennett has this item, and to be, oh, I'm sorry, John has it. Very good.
Thank you.
So as John gets ready, pay attention to the first item. It's not insignificant. I'll let John disclose what it is. Second item is about the Southside Ashpole Elementary School, which was discussed earlier in terms of the transition. And the last item has to do with 21st Century Community Learning Center summer mini grants and just basically adjusting the time period. But John.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. As Vice Chair Duncan said, the first item is related to the public school unit supplemental funding program that was funded under ESSER 3. These grants were originally created back in May of 2021. So this was these were the first kind of funding from the 10% state set aside that was created by the General Assembly. Originally, because this was passed by the board before the passage of the Appropriations Act in November, any unallotted funding was originally supposed to go towards the ESSER 3 90% large grant program. But based on the language in the Appropriations Act, we are bringing a change to the allotment policy to allow any unallotted funding from this program to be applied to the shortfall, the budget shortfall for PRC 203, which is the ESSER 3 teacher bonuses, rather than applying the funding back to the ESSER 3 90% grant program.
So for the board's benefit, this is money we'd hope to allocate to some important needs that we all know and have talked about, so what some of those needs might be. The $100 million that was allocated, there's a shortfall, John, is approximately $13 million?
It's right under $13 million.
All right, and so that shortfall, approximately right under $13 million is gonna, instead, these funds will go to that.
We have.
It is an important item for the
Yes.
board, because I think the board had given a lot of thought to how we might be able to use those funds. And I know the superintendent had also, but pursuant to the statutory language, it will be used to cover the relatively significant shortfall from the $100 million bonuses.
Yes, sir. Are there any questions?
There's heartbreak, but not questions. Now, there may be questions, I'm kidding.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
That's why I let you say it. All right, you got two more quick and easy ones.
Yes. So for the second change is for the allotment policy for the summer reading camps, which is PRC 16. This change is to facilitate the transition of the innovative school district at the end of the current fiscal year. This will allow us to calculate an allotment amount for the innovative school district, but to actually allot the funding to public schools of Robeson County. But that is provided that a plan for serving eligible students currently enrolled in the ISD is approved by the department by May 1st. Otherwise, if such a plan is not approved, we will allot the funding to the ISD, and they will have to provide the summer reading camp services prior to closure for eligible students.
Thank you. I think Dr. Jordan's nodding his head like, don't worry about that getting approved.
We do want to make sure that
Yes,
there is an
absolutely.
orderly transition, but that the services are still provided in a meaningful way.
All right, and your last item is going to be a good intro into our next
Yes,
item.
this leads into the next agenda item. For the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program for the summer mini grants, we are proposing a change to the allotment policy to allow recipients to extend the period of availability for the summer mini grant funding. Last year, they had from May 10th through September 1st. This year, we are going to allow them an extra month to facilitate effective planning and to provide kind of the maximum opportunity for them to spend those funds in a meaningful and considered way.
Very good. Any questions on that?
All right.
John, thank you.
You very much.
Yes. Our next item, picking right up on that, is BizOp 3, 21st Century Community Learning Centers, the summer mini grant recommendations. And Dr. Patricia Townsend is here to give us the report about these items.
Hey, good
Welcome.
afternoon, everyone. And so
You have seen an iteration of this presentation many times before, so I will go through expeditiously. So these funds actually emanate from our Every Student Succeeds Act funds. This would be Title IV, Part B. Okay. And with these funds, we typically are looking to either establish or expand existing community learning centers. And we typically are able to provide homework support, tutoring, anything that we can do to help students get up to grade level. We also provide enrichment activities such as STEM, mindfulness. It just depends on the particular program. And then the last element of the three that we focus on is family engagement. So working with families so that they know how to advocate for their students and how to best support them. In terms of this program, it is different from many of the ones in our division, as it can go to LEAs, community-based organizations such as YMCAs, city or county government agencies, faith-based organizations, IHEs, and also for-profit corporations. For these particular funds, it is, as was stipulated in the title, it is for our summer mini grant. In this case, recipients are eligible to receive a one-time pot of money to be able to provide summer programming, and we hope that this summer program will enable them to be able to really start addressing some of the learning loss challenges. I did want to point out, in terms of enrichment activities that could be offered, I wanted to make note of a pilot program that I am super excited about. It is called Right Brain, and you think right brain in terms of left and right, but I want you to think right in terms of writing. This is an actual author program where the students get to compose their own books, and they, at the end of the program, they would have an opportunity to actually have their hands on a bound book that they have gone through the writing process to create. One of the things that you'll see coming out of 21st Century is a big push in terms of programming, helping our programs to actually understand how to conduct high quality programming. And so Right Brain is one of our pilots. We also have done a pilot with NASA called Astronet. And so we are really working to make sure that we are addressing many of the other areas. We think we're going to have one that's able to come online a little bit later that deals with SEL, but making sure that we're capturing all the different areas and really modeling for our programs how they could actually engage in high quality programming. And so for this particular program, we used the Wallace calculator to come up with these particular ranges. And so depending on the number of students you are going to serve and for the duration of the particular program, you would be able to receive anywhere from $50,000 up to $300,000. For this program, you were able to receive a series of priority points, and those were based on you being located in an economically distressed county, you being able to service CSI or TSI schools, or being willing to offer extended programming. So offering programming that starts prior to 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. And then an additional set of points was available if you wanted to do programming on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. In terms of our application process, it all starts with a stable of dedicated reviewers. Each grant application actually receives 3 reviewers, and then those scores are then averaged to give us an average score. Then comes into DPI, we move in-house, and at that point we actually provide priority points, and we also have to subtract any technical deductions that are necessary. And then the last part of the review process is providing our suggested list of recipients to you, and then seeking your approval.
In terms of our applications, we have a pretty strict rubric. And what I'd like to say, it is board policy that we do establish these series of quality bands. Any application that falls below average, so weak or unacceptable, those particular grant applications are not, cannot be funded, just because we would not be willing to provide funds to someone who would not be able to articulate how they would really carry out this program in a good manner. And so here is where Vice Chair Duncan has really asked me to really focus, is making sure that we have equity as we begin to look across the state. And so I will say that we still, even with quite a bit of recruitment from our regional administrators across other programs within federal programs, we still are having some difficulty getting applicants on the western part of the state. I will tell you that we had 51 applicants, and if you move to the next slide, of those 51 applicants, we were able to award 14 recipients. We were able to do 2 applicants per region, with the exception of Region 7. Region 7 did have 1 applicant. However, that is an existing program, and they had some fiscal discrepancies that they needed to clear, and hence they were not considered in good standing, and we would not be able to award them funding at this time. And so you will see the 14 recipients that we are recommending, and then the remaining slides just show you the others and their scores that were not selected. And so just to recap, what we do is it's a regional competition, so we determine the number of slots that are available, and we fund those slots, and then if there's additional funds left over, then there would be a rank order of all other applicants. We've listed again our timeline, our next steps, and that really concludes the presentation unless there are questions that you have.
Thank you for all the hard work on putting these grants together and the emphasis you've had on serving all parts of the state. There may be questions. Any board members have any questions or comments? All right, not hearing any. Thank you so much for that report. Our next item, BizOp 4, and by the way, BizOp 1 through 5 are all actions on first read. And BizOp 4 is the School Nutrition Equipment Assistance Grants, which is an annual report, which I'd say constitutes good news.
I agree. Thank you for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. The department has received a one-time appropriation, which extends over every year, obviously, to provide funds to school districts in the form of grants to purchase commercial food equipment. The equipment, of course, will be used to prepare nutritious, appealing, affordable meals for students. All eligible school food authorities, eligibility determined at this point by compliance with existing federal regulations that govern their school nutrition programs. All eligible school food authorities are invited to apply. The application consists of a district application and a school-based application. The district application provides information about the need based on district financials and other considerations. The school application gives greater detail about how the school individually would use its item. All applications must be accompanied by a bid from a responsible and responsive vendor who is prepared to install the equipment upon approval. As you may recall, the selection criteria are clearly prescribed in federal guidance. We use the guidance to establish a scoring rubric. All applications are scored, and then they are ranked in order from highest to lowest, and we distribute the funds to the point the funds are exhausted. And as usual, we received over twice the amount of requests that we have funds to award, thus continuing to indicate a strong need for funding to support this purpose. But I am happy to say that on this occasion we are recommending awards to all of our districts. You may recall in some circumstances we've struggled to get applications from a few of the areas where the bandwidth, the staffing capacity was so limited. I'm so proud to say our consultants worked closely with the districts to help them get through this application process and to submit successful applicants. So we're very pleased, and thank you for considering our recommendation for the allocation.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey.
My pleasure.
Are there questions or comments on this happy news? Not seeing any. Thank you again. This op 5 is an important item to give a little bit of preface about. Y'all may have all heard some commentary about this. This item is to report to the General Assembly, which is required by statute, and it involves full-time equivalency of public school students formula. So the request is made by the General Assembly. This is not initiated by the department, or certainly not by the board, but the request made by the General Assembly to try to provide some formula. If you were to try to do an FTE calculation, what type of formula would you try to do for a full-time equivalent looking at all our students? There is a lot of concern, to be frank. There's a lot of concern out in the districts about this, and that concern's been expressed, and I assume and vocalized, and I assume some of you may well have heard that. At this point, this is not something that we are going to do anything other than approve the report to go to the General Assembly. We're not approving going to an FTE format for funding, and the General Assembly has not done that. But there are concerns about that, and that's what we've heard vocalized. So our focus here is on the formula and how that's been approached. And I think you should also pay careful attention to the report about where there are places where it may be difficult to get a FTE number with complete fidelity based on what we're working with in terms of technology right now and other issues. So I just want to give that backdrop. This is a difficult topic to present on, and I will now turn over to Alexis Schaus to take over this difficult topic to report on.
Thank you, sir. As Vice Chair Duncan stated, there is a required legislative report that is due April 15th, and that report is in your materials, the recommended report to submit to the General Assembly. But during last session, as part of the appropriations bill, the General Assembly did amend, they did amend the general statute. So this is legislation to include the following: that the state board shall establish a formula for determining the full-time equivalency, otherwise known as an FTE, of students enrolled in public school units for the state for the purposes of providing state funds on a per-pupil basis, and that the formula shall include the amount of instructional time required for a school day for a full-time student. So following this recommendation, there is a formula, but before we get to that, I think it's important to understand how we currently account for our students in our public schools. Per the State Board of Education policy, there is in the Student Accounting Manual, there is a definition of our average daily membership, and it is an average. It is not really intended for an individual student. It is looking at the sum of the number of days in membership for all non-violating students in an individual public school unit, and then that is divided by the number of days in the school month. You'll note it doesn't address instructional time as the FTE formula does, but it does state that if a student is in membership for one day, for at least half the instructional day, then they are included for the full day. So it's very binary. You're either in membership or you are not. It's either 1 or a 0, and it does not have anything to do with attendance. It is in membership, meaning like if you come to your school and you're enrolled in that school and you have a schedule and you go there for a few days and then you are sick for a couple days, that does not take away from your membership. You are still a member of that school. So that all is incorporated in our average daily membership calculation. So moving on to the full-time equivalent formula, there are certain basics of a formula which I'm sure many of you realize many of these things, but just in case, we'd look at the authoritative data source. That's just what data is to be used for this. The denominator, that is the number at the bottom of our equation, and it is going to define the minimum amount of instructional time that a student needs to be scheduled in order to be considered full-time. That's what the denominator is going to be. The numerator is going to be, that's the top number, and it's going to define for that individual student the amount of time that they have scheduled, the instructional time. there is a point in time, like when do you look at a full-time equivalent for purposes of funding? And then going, those last items are really because we have a reporting requirement that is due in October. So we need to be able to disaggregate this information by student, by grade, and by course in order so that we can provide that information. And we want it to be consistent from year to year. The calculation needs to be something that we can rely on. When we're looking at the authoritative source, consistent with average daily membership, that is PowerSchool. It would be one source. It is kind of the defined source for our student accounting, and that is, as I said, consistent with our average daily membership. Currently, schools submit to the department a principal monthly report, which from this that we calculate our average daily membership. So the denominator, this defines, as I stated, the minimum amount of instructional time that is considered to be full-time. The recommendation is really looking at, we have 185 days per the calendar law, or 1,025 hours. If you took those two numbers, that would be an average of 5.5 hours a day. Given the variances in our schools and allowing flexibility for students' needs, the recommendation is to go to a 5-hour, that's 300 minutes. That would be considered full-time. So if you are scheduled for a minimum of 300 minutes, you would be considered one. Notably, if you took like 5 hours and you times it by 185 days, just to put that in perspective, that would be at 925 hours a year out of that minimum 1,025. So when we're looking at our samples, schools have that scheduled in their calendar, in their school calendars as a minimum. When we're looking at the numerator, we're looking at scheduled instructional times. This, again, is consistent with our current student accounting manual that is state board policy. So it includes instruction. It does not include other supervised time that is listed here. But it would include like our elementary school time for recess, because that is per general statute, is a time that is supervised time. Looking at the recommended point in time, currently, as I stated, we're looking at an average over an instructional month, which is generally 20 days, 20 instructional months. It is not done by a calendar month. It is uniform, so it can be comparative by school. Another way of looking at this, instead of looking at a period of time, would be to link this in with our other dates that we have headcount information from the public schools. Namely, October 1st would be a first semester point in time, and April 1st is actually used for our EC headcount. These points in time would allow for school districts to kind of settle down, get their students finalized with their schedules in both the beginning and the second semester. So in summary, the formula that is being recommended to be submitted to the General Assembly for purposes of this report would be the students' scheduled instructional minutes on the top divided by the 300 minutes that is considered for one FTE. There is a recommendation to have for the FTE not to exceed a full one. When we look next steps, again, per legislation, there is a requirement that requires us to provide a report that would disaggregate this full-time equivalent down to by a grade and by the courses. And it specifically states to include NCVPS, university and community college, as well as non-public schools.
All right. Concern areas, as I understand it, Alexis, focus on whether or not our SIS system, as it's presently constituted, is capable of generating the aggregate data that you need in a uniform manner or a timely way to the department for you to be able to calculate this. Is that a fair concern?
Right.
statement of
Our
concern.
current student information system, which is a part of the Uniform Education Reporting System, it is kind of designed for average daily membership. That is the reporting requirements is collects data based on our principal monthly report, which is all the rules and the requirements are built around our current rules of average daily membership. We do not. It would be significant to change that and modify that to a full-time equivalent, especially going down to this kind of course level. It is not currently designed for that purpose.
And we're also in the process of converting to a new SIS, which is probably a 3-year process.
Well, we are currently determining where we would go with that new SIS,
Right.
correct. So it is not in implementation, it is the stage prior to that.
Right, we're early in that process.
Correct.
We have years to go before we sleep. Any other difficulties in terms of data aggregation from the state standpoint, other than the obvious technological ones that already exist?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that we don't have, the way our student information systems are currently set up is that they are kind of instances that are out in the school districts. We don't have an easy way to compile the information at the department level. So it is a significant resource to develop this as well as the business rules around it.
Questions and comments by board members? Dr. Oxendine.
Just quickly, what concerns have you had from superintendents?
The concerns have not been about this formula in particular. They have not expressed a concern about how the FTE is calculated. The concern is going forward and how this would be used for funding purposes, which is not that is not what our task is at this point.
Right, and the only reason I raised that question, I've had a couple of, if I could just.
Yeah, no, please.
Tag on, and then I'll be quiet. I've had a couple of concerns from my region, from superintendents about, it's just a matter, and I understand it fully, it's a matter of having had a say or a voice or contributing to the discussion in some degree. And I realize the pressure the agency is under in terms of meeting mandates and requirements and tough deadlines. Yeah, I understand that. I just felt obligated to raise that point.
Superintendent Truitt.
May I thank you? Thank you so much for calling attention to that, Dr. Oxendine. I think it's important to understand that, I appreciate superintendents saying that they wish they'd had a chance to weigh in, et cetera. I think that it's important to understand that this is not a recommendation. This is the General Assembly saying to DPI, thou shalt devise and send us. Like, they could have said, solve this math problem and send it to us. That's pretty much what happened. It's not I don't know that it would have occurred to any of us to say, oh, we need to ask others to weigh in on how to calculate this formula. I think, it would certainly be our hope that if the General Assembly decides that they want to change the funding formula, that they would then ask for superintendents to weigh in on particular and various models, et cetera. But I think that's one thing that perhaps I could have done a better job last week when we were with the superintendents was just helping them understand this is not a recommendation.
Dr. Williams.
Yes, and thank you, Superintendent Truitt. I think we might actually be of the same thinking about this issue. I can tell you where superintendents are on this right now. In my district, my small Eastern North Carolina district, and most districts around the state and the superintendents I talk to, one of the best and most innovative things they have going is a collaboration between the community colleges and the school systems. And I think we all agree with that, and we all support that, and we uplift that, and nobody, I don't know of anybody who would want to do anything to harm that relationship. But embedded within that overall relationship, in the CCP umbrella, has been the schools, because when we first started, those of us who've been around for a while, when we first started that collaboration, let's be honest, was not as deep and wide, and to be even more honest, not as healthy as it is now. There was I think it would be fair to say, competition for students, for FTEs and student enrollment numbers. And when I saw things turn dramatically in a positive direction, when school systems were allowed to, if you will, get credit for the students, and the community colleges were as well. And since then, we've seen just astronomical improvements in the collaboration between community colleges and school systems in terms of workforce development, in terms of sharing curriculum, online offerings, depth, breadth, the whole thing. We're in our district right now, we're building a new teacher pipeline vehicle with East Carolina and LCC, and so many instances of that around the state. So I think that's the driving concern, and I don't know that anybody has seen anything yet that's really a trigger for, we think this is happening or that's about to happen. I think there's just this concern that it's so great and so wonderful over here and such a vehicle for unlimited potential success that nobody wants to damage that. But if we go back to the days where only one of those two entities can get credit for that student who's actually sitting in the seat, I can tell you, my opinion and that of most superintendents in the state is that we will go back to, at best, more friction, at worst, out and out competition for students, and we'll go back to the old AP versus CCP debates that we had early on, and those battles that we fought and thought we had won and put behind us. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
So I think it's fair for all of us to put that is the future concern that is very prominent in people's minds. I just want to, and I understand that completely.
And I think we're all in agreement on that.
Yeah.
So I would call for us just to all stand together, speak with one voice, and say that, because I don't know that there's anybody in this room who disagrees with that. I think we're all on that same page. So when we advocate beyond here and beyond the state board entity, with the General Assembly and otherwise, that we just need to, because I think they want to do what is best, and we just need to herald that as the best.
It could not have been said better than the way you said it. So we need to realize that what we're doing now is a required exercise, I will call it, to provide this information as best we can for formula, and that's the work that's going into it. And with respect to anything that follows hereafter, then we are all, having had this preliminary conversation, and we are all very much of a mind to be supportive of finding a way to not interfere with the tremendous work that's happening with our collaborative high schools. So I think that's a concern, but that's our future concern. That's not today's exercise.
But I do want to thank you so much for bringing clarity to that issue, because I wasn't quite sure of all the surrounding concerns, but you really laid it out very nicely. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a really brief question in the same line?
Yes, Mr. Ford, please.
All right, thank you so much. And Alexis, again, I always appreciate that you make complex things sound simple. So I'm going to kind of challenge you to do the same thing here. Since we're not actually taking action on this, and we're just in the thinking phase of this, I want to just kind of add on a more specific question and think about when it comes to the FTEs, and when we're talking about like the early colleges, right, and those students in particular. Some of the, even though they're enrolled, right, in receiving college course credit, does the calculation make any considerations or factor in some of the services that they do receive from the school, be it transportation, be it school counseling, be it nutrition, etc.? And again, that may not be, as you mentioned, Chair Duncan, something that we are to discuss or think about right now, but I just wanted to get it on the record as we dig further into that. Hopefully we can attend to that particular question as well as part of our inquiry.
So just to make this clear, that we are requesting, this is a SB submitted report that goes over to the General Assembly, and so there will be a request to vote on the report itself and the formula that is being submitted. To the second part, what I understand your question is where the FTE formula at this point is only considering scheduled instructional minutes. And it does not consider the fact that public school units unlike community colleges, are actually responsible for those students from when they pick them up on the bus to when they drop them off, and maybe even after school with sports, etc. It does not do that. Some of the reasons for that is some of that consistency, some of the ability to do that with fidelity. But it is also, when you're looking at an equation, keep in mind, I don't mean to sound patronizing, but you've got the top and the bottom, right? So you can make the bottom larger and make the top larger, but you're still going to come out with a 1 FTE, right? So if you took from bell to bell, with all those things in the middle, you would be perhaps making your denominator 350 minutes, but then those students would also be scheduled for, instead of 340 minutes or whatever, they would be 360. So I don't mean to say it would come to the same thing, but I do think so it may not be mathematically something that changes the result, but I do think it is a very important message to, when we're talking about full-time equivalent, which community colleges are funded based on a full-time equivalent, that we're not talking about 3 credit units. We're not talking about things that are easily to be quantified with our public school units. We are responsible for those students during the time that they're in our custody, as well as there are times that they are receiving not just their teacher of record, but they would have a pull-out class at the same time. There is a kind of an overlapping services for those students, specifically those with special populations. So public school students and the instruction of them are much more complex than our adult learners. So I do think it's a very important message to get across when we're looking at the costs, etc. But I'm not sure that it's something that for calculating a full-time equivalent necessarily has to be incorporated into that formula.
So perhaps as we
Thank
send
you.
the report over, there might be some cover that just says care must be taken in terms of how FTE type information is used. I'm not meaning to wordsmith it, but Superintendent Truitt.
Yeah, thank you,
I'll let you wordsmith.
So I will say that when some legislators were with, where were they last week? In Union County, thank you, yeah. So there were some legislators in Union County last week who were asked about this publicly, and the response was, we think that the way we're funding schools right now is the best way, but let's make sure. So so what she said was, all I'm doing is asking for this information, and then we'll take a look at it. And to that end, what I can certainly promise public schools in North Carolina is that our legislative affairs team will work hand in hand with the Superintendent's Association and the General Assembly to communicate continuously about what's being discussed as it comes to light. So I understand there's a lot of consternation around this, and the last thing we want is for there to be a lack of communication or for our schools not to be advocated for.
So, any other questions or comments on this? Thank you for those remarks. All right, if there are not any, as Alexis reinforced and reminded us, we are in fact, we'll be voting as an action item to adopt for submission this formula to the General Assembly, consistent with the requirement that we do so by April 15th by statute. So everyone knows what our vote is about. All right, Alexis, don't go away, because our next item is going to be, I think, a monthly budget report. Is there anything you plan on reporting this month?
I believe that we were taking the budget expansion items in lieu of any discussion on our current budget.
Yes, I think that's, is there anything else in terms of how, as we come towards the end of the fiscal year, is everything in line with what you're expecting?
Well, it is hard to say with this. We are implementing a budget as well as developing next year's budget and doing closeouts, starting our closeout all at kind of the same time. But we are in that phase of really evaluating now that all the salary items have been implemented to the most part, including all the retro pay, et cetera. All those things have a significant impact on our budget. So we are going in, starting in that last quarter and evaluating where we are, kind of projecting those reversions, as well as building next year to see where we are. One of the biggest kind of unknowns is our student population, which is going to be a real challenge for next year. As you recall, this year we thought that there was going to be a larger bounce back than we saw, but then in that kind of February and March time, with the COVID situation getting much better, we are much more optimistic on our student population for next year. So there are a lot of pieces that we are spending a lot of time looking at, and we all wish we had that crystal ball, right? So, but with regards to where we are this year, which is, I'm sorry, I kind of I went off on a different tangent, but this year we are looking where we would expect based on the information we have. We will have a much better picture once we get that third quarter closed, and we can really evaluate for the last quarter.
All right. Well, thank you. Even though you didn't intend to give a report, that was actually a very good one to help everybody understand there are three things going on at once, and so it's very taxing on your staff, and thank you for providing that information. We have updated contracts that was in your material, both proposed and executed. I have not heard anyone have any questions about those. Is there a question that anyone has? Not hearing anything, we are at our next item, which is a report from Mr. John Paul, Executive Director of North Carolina Education Corps, about the ongoing development of North Carolina Education Corps. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and members of the board. I'm John Paul Smith, Executive Director of North Carolina Education Corps. I'm often joined by our Chief Volunteer and Board Chair, Dr. Mike Ward. He's not here today, but he does send his regards. I'm excited about sharing the progress of the North Carolina Education Corps. We have moved very quickly in a short amount of time. So there's a lot to celebrate. There's a lot to be proud about. There's a lot to thank you all for. You are the founders of the feast. We started North Carolina Education Corps as an initiative of the State Board of Education and the Governor's Office about 18 months ago. And it occurred to me this weekend between basketball games that our 501c3 nonprofit just turned 1 year old. So we did that this weekend. Between last year and this year, we've gone from securing $1.4 million in funding to now having access to $14 million. So significant increase there. And that's thanks in part to collaboration with this group, folks in the Governor's Office, and getting $13.5 million in ESSER 3 funding through the state budget. And then also some additional gear funding, $726,000 in extra gear funding from the Governor's Office as well. So there's that big development. There's also the development of, we went from an organization providing somewhat general support to 20 public school districts across the state, recruiting, training, placing core members who are serving in a variety of different roles, contact tracers, K-2 tutors, as well as individuals helping high school students stay engaged in class and stay on track for graduation, to an organization that's really hyper-focused on making sure we have high-dosage tutors helping early grade students learn how to read. And we evolved in this way to make sure that we're aligned and helping to advance some of the goals of the Excellent Public Schools Act, Operation Polaris, the strategic plan of the State Board of Education, and we're on track to do that. Our partners this year, so we've gone from partnering with 20 public school districts to 24 this year. We are partnered with districts in 7 of the 8 education regions. We're on track to be working with PSUs in all 8 of the regions going into next year. A lot of diversity in terms of types of districts that we're supporting. You can see here on this map that we serve districts in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 districts. Overwhelming majority serving Tier 1 districts and Tier 2 districts. Also serving Tier 3 districts where there are large achievement gaps. So very proud of our core members who, again, are working with early grade students to help them with boost their reading proficiency, really working with them to build out their phonics and phonological awareness skills this year. Next slide. So in terms of the number of tutors that we have this year, our goal was to hit 250. We have not hit 250 yet. We're well on track to do that. We currently have 179 core members serving in these 24 different PSUs. We still have more core members in process to be hired. So just as a reminder, we do the majority of the heavy lifting to take the burden off of districts around recruiting. At the end of the day, our tutors become employees of the local school districts. One of the lessons that we've learned this year is our timing was off this year around recruitment, so we started late as we were evolving from kind of general support to targeted support around K-3 literacy last spring. We were starting recruitment going into the summer, which is just not the right time to begin recruitment. So we're getting ahead of that this year going into next year. That's one lesson learned. Another thing that we're working on is time to hire. So we have a 90% conversion rate of who we recruit and recommend to school districts to who actually gets hired. But the larger issue is that some of the folks that we recommend, because the local HR departments are dealing with so much and trying to fill positions for school bus drivers, cafeteria workers, classroom teachers, they have a lot on their plate, and it takes about 4 to 6 weeks for them to often get back to the tutor candidates that we have recommended. So we've seen 40 to 50 great candidates that we've recommended drop off this year because they haven't heard back from the district soon enough. So we're putting processes in place to improve that time to hire going into next year, which will help us to increase the number of tutors going into next year. The other thing that's going to help a lot is we're now with the new funding that we have, we'll be able to build out our recruitment team, and we'll have more people to actually do the recruitment. So that'll help a lot. We have had some core member resignations. A lot of them are just due to personal issues where we've had some college students whose schedules have changed and they've needed to, they haven't been able to complete the school year, those types of things that often happen. But it's a small percentage of the overall number of tutors that we're hiring. We're building out our team to grow our impact. So this year we had 3 full-time employees. We now have 18 full-time employees. A large percentage of our employees, over half, are working as learning coaches. So they're helping to coach the tutors to make sure that they're equipped and effective in working with the students on a day-to-day basis. We can go to the next slide. We have kicked off a program evaluation with, it's a joint collaboration between the Friday Institute and the Duke Social Science Institute of Research. They're going to be conducting a 3 years mixed methods program evaluation of our work, make sure that we're developing effective partnerships with our school partners, make sure that we're doing a good job and we're learning about how to recruit better, make sure that our tutors are well trained, that they're using high impact interventions with students, and students are actually seeing growth in terms of personal growth as well as academic growth. So we're excited to get this going. It kicked off, and I'll just get back to it for a second. It kicked off in February, and in the process of developing the program evaluation, we benefited from some of the insights of Dr. Marr, who's behind my right shoulder. So really appreciate his support on that as well. Next slide. Have gotten some good press. We continue to build our brand. So we're a brand new organization, continue to build awareness across the state. Have gotten some good press through PBS's NC Impact program with Anita Brown-Graham. This is a picture from a panel that we did with Anita. I think it was late January, February-ish. Also, WUNC has provided some coverage that's helped with our recruitment effort. Their story was so good. They covered a story of core members in Scotland County that actually the national NPR station picked it up and ran it nationwide. And we've gotten coverage from some other news outlets as well. Next slide, please. So as we think about our growth trajectory, we think about it in 3 phases. The first phase is really the last 18 months, so that's kind of our startup phase. Get going, do really good work. The next phase is sure up, and then the final phase 2 years from now will be scale up. So over the next 2 years, what we really want to focus on is not only doing good work, but doing good work really well and getting disciplined in our operations, really understanding how to refine our service model so that we're working with our district partners in a way that's effective and efficient, and we continue to get better. And then also put some infrastructure in place so that we have the right model, we understand what it takes to support students in different parts of the state, in different districts, and then based on those learnings, we really understand what it takes to scale up effectively. So you can see some of our organizational progress laid out here. You have a number of materials, I think, provided to you, and I won't go through all of them, but I will just go through this right here. Again, we've made great strides since last year when we started out, or September 2020 is really when we started out as an initiative of the State Board of Ed. And where our focus is right now is in this phase 2 and the sure up. So you heard me speak to perfecting the service model, really getting good at recruiting, hiring, matching, and monitoring what our tutors are doing. And also thinking through different approaches to working with school districts. So is it always going to make sense at the end of the day for the school districts to hire tutors on their own payroll? Or are there circumstances where it makes more sense for us to hire the tutors ourselves? One area that we're looking at related to that is it could make sense. One natural place where it makes sense for us to pilot out hiring tutors is around virtual tutoring. So that's something that we're looking into. We're also focused on refining our service model around district engagement, higher education partnerships. We're working closely with EPP programs, both in community colleges as well as within 4-year colleges, to really make sure that we are providing opportunities for community college and college students to get some work experience in schools that they may want to work with when they graduate, to earn some money while they're doing it, and potentially, this isn't where we are now, but potentially get some course credit while they're serving as tutors. We're also seeing quite a bit of interest from students who are non-education majors in psychology, social work, human services, other public service-oriented type majors who see this as a great opportunity to get some work experience, earn some money and serve students as well. So lots to think through in terms of perfecting the service model, also lots to work on in terms of building the infrastructure of the team, getting the right tools and systems in place for rapid growth, and then also making sure that we have the right cash foundation if we're trying to test things out like hiring tutors on our own. We continue to build awareness, relationship, and drive towards results. One reference point that we're looking at right now is the state of Tennessee. You all may have seen that the state of Tennessee has invested $200 million in high distance tutoring. They're trying to make sure that there are tutors that are able to support 150,000 students, both math tutoring and literacy tutoring in the state of Tennessee. They're trying to flip a switch and do that overnight. We want to serve students as fast as we can, as effectively as we can. The approach that we're taking is let's get our sea legs underneath us first, make sure that we have the model in place that will allow us to do that and to do it well. And another reference point that I think about is, when Henry Ford first conceived the Model T, it took 13 hours to build it. 5 years later, he got it to a point where they were producing a car every 90 seconds. We are trying to put processes in place right now where we can get to a point for rapid scale up. So that's kind of the next phase is that scale up. I'll stop there. Any questions?
Questions or comments? Yes, Dr. Armstrong.
Yes, I have a question about the, could you describe your training model for your tutors?
Yeah, so, first thing I'll say too is that there are a number of different general tutoring models. So the model that we're looking at in general with tutoring is high dosage tutoring. So this isn't reading buddies. This is all of the tutors are working with students, the same students, 3 times a week, 30 minutes a session, and they're using intervention curriculums that are grounded in the science of reading. And so what we do is we do a lot of the front end training with the tutors, and then the school districts that we're working with, they do what I call last mile training. So we'll do training on professional excellence, we'll do training on best practices around working with kids, tutoring kids. All of our tutors this year have gone through they've done some science of reading training, they've gone through reading research to classroom practice, or they've done an online program called Reading Teachers Top 10 Tools. And that's just varied based on the needs of tutors in different districts. And then at the end of the day, they are then trained by the school districts that they're working with in terms of what intervention curriculum should I be using on a day-to-day basis, what exercises should I be doing with my students based on the individual student needs. So literacy lead within an individual elementary school will look at M-class data, and they'll match tutors to the students and say, okay, based on the student's information, this is how you should be working with them. And one of the things that's really important to us is, as an organization, there's a question around how much do you standardize and how much do you customize. One thing, and it's also, there's a tension between fidelity to the model and flexibility for school districts. One thing that's really important to us is that our tutors and classroom teachers can communicate well together, and they can speak the same language. So the more we can get to a point where all classroom teachers have embraced the science of reading and they're using intervention curriculums with students, and our tutors can use those same intervention curriculums, the better off the communication is going to be, the better off the support's going to be for those students. So right now, we are seeing there are probably 4 or 5 main intervention curriculums that are being used across the state, but instead of requiring all of our tutors to use the exact same intervention, we work with the districts to make sure that they're using the interventions that are aligned with what classroom teachers are using.
It sounds great. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, John Paul, thank you very much for the report. We appreciate it, and we continue to look forward to being posted about how things are developing and how things are going.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next report is the implementation report for this month, which is our report on CARES funds and ESSER funds. And Dr. Taylor and Dr. Jordan, I believe, are here to, Dr. Marr is here to.
Stepping in for Dr. Taylor, he
All
had to
right.
leave, so he sends his regrets for not being able
Usually
to
someone else you're letting step in for you. So
that's what I
you
tried.
really
I
crossed
couldn't
the
get out of
line.
it this month. This is thankfully, I think, this is the final CARES and SRSA updates. So we've been given these updates for the last couple of months. We have 3 updates to make today. 2 of them are under the leadership of Dr. Taylor. So I'll talk about the first one there. Then Dr. Essick is going to talk about the second, and then Dr. Jordan will come up and round us out. And then we'll get ready for the round of updates for ARP as they become available for you all.
We'll give you a month off.
Okay. So the first one for Dr. Taylor was the UNC Worldview. So this was a $150,000 ESSER 2 item that was approved back in November of 2021. The MOU has been developed between the Department of Public Instruction and the UNC. It is budgeted for developing Worldview and approved by UNC, and the project data will be shared with the Office of Learning and Recovery. In essence, they're building out 3 programs: a Global Education 101, a Global Fellows Program, and the Worldview Teacher-Student Initiative. And just briefly on those 3 items. The Global Education 101 provides customized PD to schools and districts on developing competencies around global education. The High School Initiative provides virtual connection with UNC faculty and students and teachers to address various global initiatives. Provides direct connections to classrooms. Dr. Taylor notes that he participated in a session last week, and it provides an opportunity for students to engage with faculty on real-world issues. The session he attended was on water and its impact on global issue. And then finally, the Global Fellows Program assists in developing teaching competencies, teacher toolkits, and lesson plans for K-12. The program was initially piloted in Eastern North Carolina, but now can be piloted and expanded to all teachers K-12, and he knows he'll give additional updates if you so require. Okay. Dr. Essick?
Were there any questions on those? All right, not hearing any. Dr. Essick, welcome back.
Sure, thank you. So we've been working with the SEL implementation team to create district-level SEL profiles for our districts. We will be contracting with the School of Social Work at UNC, and they'll be helping with that so that school districts don't have to do the work themselves, but we're able to use the data and collect that and create those profiles. Also, currently, Dr. Korn's working on a research project with Duke University for a grant, and if all of that comes together, we'll be able to leverage some of those funds and create those profiles and get a good set of data on what's going on in districts. So that's where that is right now.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks.
Any questions or comments on that report? Yes, Treasurer Falwell.
Thank you. I may have just glossed over it quickly. Was there a slide on there about cybersecurity? Okay.
That was last month.
Just very quickly, because I know what's happening.
Yes, and that would have been, I think that one was already presented either last month or the month
I know
prior.
what's happening to our premiums on cybersecurity at the Treasurer's Office. Are you seeing the same type of 100% increases in the insurance?
I would have to defer to Dr. Wren on that.
Okay, yeah, so just.
She is here, so.
You can answer at some later point, but.
This is not for premiums, this is for a third-party assessment.
Dr. Wren, if you come up to the microphone, please. Thank you so much.
Treasurer Falwell, this $1 million for cybersecurity assessment is not for insurance premiums for this. This was an assessment that took place with all 115 of our LEAs, where a company came in, Accenture, and reviewed their cybersecurity posture and then put together a plan on how we can put them in a better position moving forward. So we've used their plans as we look forward to developing a cybersecurity plan across the state. I have heard also that cybersecurity premiums are going up significantly, but that is contracts that our schools are entering into privately, not us here at the agency level.
Follow up quickly.
Yes.
Thank you. That assessment will give you a score. The score will determine how good or how bad you are. That will also determine your premiums.
I can't speak to that. I would have to defer to Mike Ramsey, the director over that, who's been working with that. I am not aware of a score. The purpose of this assessment was to create a plan for training and for assets that each PSU needed.
Okay.
My understanding is it did not create a score for cybersecurity insurance.
Okay. Well, it's just a credit score, and then it's used for other things. So I'll just make one closing comment. I know that I worked on this 12 years ago. We've collectively doing our workers' comp out of this agency on behalf of all the LEAs. I would hope that we can somehow take advantage of our buying power on this cybersecurity insurance and do that collectively also, because I think with the good scores and some bad scores that we can end up saving everybody a lot of money by doing that as an agency. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wren.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Jordan.
Thank you. Our next slide, I believe. Thank you. So I will first say thank you to this board and to the superintendent for your support of the residential schools. We are quite thankful that we have been able to access the additional dollars around mentorship, leadership support for the residential schools. We determined that we would not be able to find a full-time employee, and so we have sought out a contractor who we know has skills and abilities, having served as a superintendent and also as the interim chancellor at the North Carolina School of Science and Math. So that person not only has the public school experience, but also the residential school experience, and is providing regular support, both face-to-face and virtual support to the school directors as they work to develop a comprehensive strategic plan, as well as an opportunity to focus in on some of the critical needs at the residential schools, not the least of which is culture building.
Thank you. Any questions, comments for Dr. Jordan? All right, thank you for this report. We're going to double back. Dr. Tomlin's dramatic re-entrance distracted me from Actually, I just omitted the last contract. The SAS Institute contract, I believe Barry Pace has a report. This is about the AS 400 I-Series hosting. Mr. Pace, my apologies. No, we're happy to see you.
I think he was just mentioning that.
You're good.
I got left out there.
He's waiting in the wings.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Duncan,
My apologies.
for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to speak to the board this afternoon. So this AS400 hosting contract, Amendment 10, simply renews the existing agreement with SAS for hosting PSU, LEA AS400s. And so this was a race to the top initiative, not specific legislation. And the plan was to take these AS400s that the school districts paid tens of thousands of dollars or leased for tens of thousands of dollars per year and move them to the cloud as a managed service and manage that to sunset. And so we are not to the point of sunsetting. As an example, let's say a school district employee moves to Georgia, takes a job, and then decides to retire early. They would reach out for that historical financial data that exists on the AS400 for the previous school district. And the school district is still reliant upon that data in most cases around the state. And so they would have to use that data to present an accurate record of that employee's pay for that early retirement. So I just wanted to give you an example of some of the kinds of things that require way beyond 5 years of historical data on the AS400.
All right. Thank you. Questions or comments on this contract? We are hoping to sunset this contract at some point, but it's not going to be immediate.
This contract, of course, has an optional year, and I have informed, SAS that we don't have a specific date around this because a lot of it depends on the ERP migrations.
Thank you. Our next item is a special report on school transportation. As you know, we have been having a lot of issues in terms of the dramatic change in gas prices, and so Kevin Harrison has a quick report. Quick, Kevin.
Quick report on 3 topics. I will keep it moving. Thank you for having me today to update you on this. So 3 topics: fuel prices in the current year, the potential impact for next year, and then allocations of transportation funding for the following year. So to begin with, the fuel contract, some background, some fuel. Those are the diesel prices over the past a long time. And you'll see that this year, though, the number is much higher. And that's an average price for this school year so far. So that's high because it's an average, because for most of the year we were below that. So we use around 26 million gallons of diesel fuel a year. Last budget amount was $2.10 a gallon, and we've allocated an amount that's about $2.30 a gallon. We don't fund fuel specifically like a line item because we don't really do line item budgeting, but it does impact budgets significantly when the cost of fuel goes up. So our next steps here, this week, we are planning putting out a request for districts to ask for additional fuel funding. It's going to require documentation that their costs are higher than anticipated. And any district seeking additional funding must also demonstrate that they're not also transferring the funds to some other purpose, right? If you're transferring funds out, you can't ask for more money. You've got to be using the money you have first. So those are our next steps on that front. As to what we have available to do this with, we have about $4.7 million unbudgeted in PRC 056 presently, which is K through 12 to and from school transportation. And if requests exceed that amount, we'll, of course, work with school business to determine if there are any additional available sources of funds. As always, with school districts, anything that is unfunded or partially unfunded remains the district's responsibility. So next year, predicting the future, gosh, if I had a crystal ball, I probably wouldn't be working for you today because I would have bought a whole bunch of futures contracts for delivery of ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel in New York Harbor. But I am still, and I don't have a crystal ball. So this hinges on war, sanctions, market perception of the war and sanctions. As you see, our recent state term contract pricing has been all over the board. $3, $4.30 on March 29th. This week it was $3.80. It's going to be about $3.80 this week, which is down significantly from last week. So state term contract weekly fuel pricing has been a little bit all over the place. And I apologize, some of this stuff I wrote last week, so when I say next week, I really meant this week. But also, I would say the current New York ultra-low diesel fuel price, when I took that slide, it was $3.69. It's now $3.47 as of yesterday. So we may still see some additional decreases in fuel costs. Not really clear. Of course, there could be a new development in the war and everything change next week, and I could be giving you an entirely different thing a couple of days from now. The next steps for this one are going to be an expansion or continuation budget request. We're going to suggest that there be a creation of a special school transportation fuel reserve. This is just to recognize that bad things happen. I've listed some of the bad things that have happened since I have been in this, since I've been at DPI. Hurricane Katrina, Deepwater Horizon, a pipeline explosion, a pipeline cyber attack, war, sanctions, all of those things happen. And when they happen, the price of fuel goes up significantly for us. And let's just recognize that that exists instead of scrambling on the back end. Recognize it exists up front and create a set of money to deal with it when such a situation exists. If we don't need it, great. And it should be only used when the regular allotment is already allotted. Some reserve size options, and these numbers look big. Again, with the last week, this week thing, this is really last week and 2 weeks ago, but we're looking at some estimated additional costs for this fuel reserve. This is if that price persisted for an entire year. So when we're starting out, normally, if we have a hurricane or something like that, this is a 4 to 6 month thing where the prices are higher. When we start talking about wars and sanctions, we could be looking at a price that persists for a period of time. So I'd recommend that reserve be substantial to account for the fact that at least next year, we have no idea. It could be better tomorrow and we need nothing. Or it could stay high and we need $32 million. But again, 26 million gallons of fuel in a year, so we can't, you gotta think if the fuel, $1, $1.20 is gonna get you to $32 million. And we know, at least from gasoline prices that you've seen at the pump, that prices are up significantly. And hope that they'll go down, but let's plan as if they wouldn't. The last thing on my list is the transportation allotment for the 22-23 school year. Some background. Our normal methodology for transportation funding would be to use this year's transportation data, fall ridership, fall route data, the buses that get utilized, and the full year of state and local expenditures for 21-22 to determine next year's funding. Well, there are some problems beginning to show with that methodology. Again, as we know from 2020-2021, there were definitely problems with that year's data because of COVID and school closures. But next slide. Then here's where our problems are beginning to show. Our ridership count figures, now we haven't fully vetted these yet, but our ridership figures are down on average 22%. Even though ADM, and this is a lot at ADM, but actual ADM is only a couple percentage points different on average on the negative side. So you see we've lost a lot more riders than stopped attending school. That to me means that this will likely not persist. I mean, we have some districts that are down 40% of their ridership. We don't think that next year that will be the case. Lots of reasons why, from having to wear masks in public transit to virtual schools, all sorts of different things that we think as they disappear and things get more normal, that these ridership figures will come back. So our next steps here are to continue to evaluate that situation and determine the best funding distribution for the available funds we receive from the General Assembly. Any General Assembly actions on this point may influence what we do as they come in over the next couple of months to determine budgeting for next year. From there, we need an allotment policy for 22-23, which outlines how we're going to fund the districts if it's not going to be via the normal processes. And also, our existing tools for district budgeting purposes aren't particularly helpful if we use this year's data. If we use this year's data with 40% ridership loss in some districts, or 30 or 40% ridership loss, those tools aren't going to do a great job at predicting what you should receive next year, because the new model will be vastly different from the old one. So we will need to update those tools based on any policy choices that were made. And with that,
that's very helpful.
Have any questions?
Questions or comments?
Just quickly, I think I'm the only one here old enough to have been in the workforce in the early 70s, so I've experienced this, and I've driven big vehicles all my life. And people who drive trucks were kind of routine people. So I think any message that you can get out and push the power down to the person who's cranking these vehicles and shutting off these vehicles. I know all about the need to do that for diesels, but it's not as cold as it was. They don't need to start them as early as they did, and then they can cut them off earlier than they have. And if we can just push the power down to these drivers and let them be part of the solution, I think you can probably save 10% on consumption. Just making them aware that this is happening.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a great idea. We can make them aware of the requirements. All districts are required to have a reduced idling policy in place to get any additional fuel funds. That's been in place for a good number of years, but to make them aware of the importance of this and just how much fuel is costing, that's a really great idea.
Dr. Arsenault.
Treasurer Falwell, I'm going to add myself to your column. I drove a bus, believe it or not. I drove a school bus. My students at Pembroke can't believe it when I tell them that. But I did.
What decade was that?
I drove a flat-nosed bus. It was stretched long, you know. When? Just figure it out.
I did before I asked the question.
Read the history when students could no longer drive buses, and you can. But anyway, my question is this: I wonder if there would be any cost savings, and I don't even know if we still do this in North Carolina. The replicated or the duplicated routes. Does that make sense? Here it is. It's like the bus goes through a neighborhood to pick up the 5-year-old. The bus goes down the same path to pick up the 13-year-old. The same house. Is that going on?
Yeah, I would imagine it is. So that's really a district choice in some regards as to how they wish to organize. There are some districts which have to, right? Like Terrell County. This is always the one that comes to my mind, where they send the buses out, they pick up every kid on the way back in, and every bus is K through 12, right? And that's because they don't want to go back out. But you could also get to a situation in Wake County where the reason they go back out is because all the schools start at different times, and you want to deliver multiple groups of students in a very short time period. So you could load up a bus in 2 stops at some stops in Wake County. Right, so it's not like they're spending a lot of time going through the same neighborhood over and over again in those cases, because they might have to go to that neighborhood with their. I mean, I've heard tell in Buncombe or Asheville of a situation where they have to send 2 buses just to pick up the middle and high school students at that stop, and yeah, they're all mixed together, but they're having to send 2 buses out there anyway, just for that one location. So it really depends on the school district, and we don't really get down into the details of whether or not they should or not. Some people, the legislation or general statute allows them to have separate bus routes for different age groups, but yeah, I mean, there are some instances where it may be beneficial for them to do that, and some cases where, in many cases, where they already are, especially for a middle high school pair, they might put the middle and high schoolers together. You see a little bit less of that K through 12 because you've got very, very young students with very mature students.
diesel was about 99 cents when I drove the bus.
Mr. Hall.
Quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the notification to the districts for additional funding,
Yes.
to whom will you direct that notification to? Would it be the principal, would it be the director of transportation, or would it be the finance officer?
So we have a general school bus list, which is an email listserv that any district staff member as well as our own staff are part of. That's some 900 people. But we also send all of those. We're assured that all of the transportation directors are part of that. They're the ones that generally put together the request. But in this case, because of the backup documentation requirements, finance officers will also be involved as well.
I strongly encourage that.
Yes.
To be done. And just Treasurer Farwell, I drove school bus $18.75 an hour.
Yeah.
That's all it was, everybody. And I drove a long distance 18-wheeler for 2 summers from York, Pennsylvania to Winton. And I can tell you, when you were talking about cutting them off, and he's right, it will save. Because they said we had to cut them off when we stopped.
Well, let's be clear for the minutes, not $18.75 to drive a school bus. You were driving a tractor trailer.
No, I was driving, no, I was driving a school bus.
A day, a day, not
A month.
A month.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. Everybody got the same money.
Yeah.
And I drove it, I left at 5:30 in the morning to pick up my first route and got back at like 6, 7 at night.
And
So anyway.
I will say there's more bears than people in Terrell County, and if you call Superintendent Holly at 4 o'clock in Terrell County, you're most likely going to catch him driving the school bus as the superintendent. No, now.
I'm saying.
Right now.
No, right now he's driving the school bus.
Vice Chair Duncan, can you get control of this? I've clearly lost control. We're talking about bears. So, thank you, Kevin.
Certainly.
We have no consent items this month, but I do want to briefly say something about that. One of our typical consent item issues is chief financial officers and certifying those and authorizing those on request. We have 15 LEAs or PSUs that do not have a finance officer right now. This is a serious issue, and so I'm raising it today not to try to resolve the issue, but we need to work collectively to come up with some ideas as how we can improve upon this situation. We've had some preliminary discussions, but we have to have much deeper discussion and may come back at some point to the board with some thoughts. But it is a very serious issue, and some superintendents are clearly having difficulty sleeping at night, and understandably so. That's it for the Business Operations Committee, mercifully.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and my thanks to board members, Superintendent Truitt, and DPI staff and other contributors for participating in today's meeting. This concludes today's committee updates. I now ask for a motion to go into closed session and note for audience and online listeners that following closed session, this April 6, 2022 meeting will adjourn immediately. Vice Chair Duncan.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318.11A, 1, 3, and 6, to prevent the disclosure of personnel information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Sections 115C-319 and -321. To consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or conditions of appointment of public officers or employees or prospective public officers or employees, and to consult with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including specifically to consider the case of Kathy Reeves versus Freddie Williamson et al.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by the treasurer. Before I call for a vote, those of us in the room, if you could bring your computers so that our technology partners can help us get up to speed on Office 365. We'll do that right before we go into closed. Okay. Ms. Martin, would you please call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Candence? Yes. Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
yes.
Mr. Ford? Mr. Ford? Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson?
Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. We'll begin closed session at 5 p.m. We're adjourned.
We're gonna.